the laziest Kryptonian in the Marvel Universe. Welcome back, brave explorers of impossible worlds. We are excited to have you here to continue this odyssey together. Before we continue, everything you'll hear is pure fiction, so please don't try to replicate combat techniques at home. This wonderful story and all its rights belong to its brilliant original author. We are only the messengers of entertainment. Want another dose of adventure? Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a single chapter, and if you can't wait, our Patreon has exclusive surprises you'll love. Chapter 1 Prologue. You and I are mortals, born in the human world. We toil day and night, never a moment's rest. Since we're not immortals, distractions are inevitable. Let morality and justice be on either side, and profit be in the center. A song, not too unpleasant, or at least not out of tune, echoed through a small tram. The driver, amused himself, gazed out at the dimly lit streets. Have you ever seen the city at 1 in the morning? I see it every day after work, the singer pondered. He had imagined a life of slavery, but unexpectedly, as he passed an intersection, a blinding flash of fog lights suddenly appeared from his left. This was followed by a nearly ear-piercing, low-pitched horn blast, like the mooing of a cow. The brightness and clamor prevented the driver from immediately registering what was happening. He simply continued driving, turning his head to glance to his left. It was a time traveler's artifact, a massive truck. When he realized what was coming towards him, the immense force of the collision, like a firing pin hiding a cannon's primer, instantly exploded the battery under the electric car, sending a shower of sparks. The truck didn't stop, as they were in a suburban area. There weren't any decent cameras nearby, and even with no other cars on the road, dashcams were useless. By the time the fire department arrived, photos of the accident scene had already gone viral. The fire had long since died, leaving the car, reduced to a charred skeleton, sitting alone on the road. A faint mark, unlike any other visible on the driver's side, stood as a final reminder of a certain beast's presence. The only person who cared about him was his boss. The team leader was furious because someone had been absent from work for the next few days without cause, leaving work unfinished and unhanded over. Finally, a pink slip was mailed to the empty house, still under a 30-year mortgage. Months later, the bank's foreclosure agents tossed it into the trash. No one cared for the missing owner. Crossing, when the happy cow horseman opened his eyes again, he did not see the familiar driver's seat, nor did he see big trucks or dazzling lights outside the window. But, well, even the window was different. He felt like he was sitting in a massage chair, with his back tightly wrapped on both sides. Directly in front of him was an oval, slightly convex transparent shield, which was his only window to observe the outside world. It was a little difficult to turn his head, but his eyeballs could still move. He looked left and right, and with his limited field of vision, he seemed to be in a closed space. Then he looked out the viewfinder, which was a pitch-black scene dotted with stars. Is this night? It just flashed by, and the planet with a meteorite ring flashed past the window with an unimaginable huge scale. The night sky will not have the kind of scenes that can only be seen in planetariums or movies. I carefully observed the scene outside the viewfinder, watching the giant stars flash by from time to time, and the glaring lights in the distance. Oh, this reminded the trapped person of the truck's fog lights, just like what happened not long ago. I felt my limbs. Although they felt like they were squeezed into a padded container, at least they were not deprived of mobility, just difficult to move. I struggled to free my right hand and raised it in front of me. It was clearly not my own arm, or more accurately, it was clearly not an arm of my age. It was plump and short, and the skin was so fine that it had a sheen, leaving no doubt about its elasticity. This kind of extreme health, even perfection, would not be seen in a chronically sleep-deprived beast of burden, not to mention the proportions. It was not that of an adult. So, was I reincarnated? Traveled through time? Or perhaps reborn? But my mind had no extra memories. I couldn't even figure out what my current condition was. Judging from the view outside the window, it wasn't some bizarre quantum world, nor some strange and magnificent metaphysical realm. Most likely, it was somewhere in space. I just couldn't figure out where I was. After all, if this was truly space, it was so vast, so it wouldn't be surprising if I was anywhere. Another massive star passed by the window. Its brown and white stripes, and the large red spot that looked like an eye, reminded me of the image of Jupiter I remembered. So, there was a high probability I was in the solar system? and the planet with rings I saw earlier might be Saturn? Judging from this sequence, I was most likely flying directly towards the Earth, or the Sun. Okay. There were no rudders or controls anywhere I could see, not even a control panel. So, I had no idea whether this thing I was on was steerable or simply being pulled in by the sun's gravity. If it was the former, then I was going home. If it was the latter, then I'd be back home selling salted duck eggs. Just traveled through time and now face death? No, this might be a sci-fi version of the Nay Bridge. Anyway, as a qualified slave worker, I'd given up on thinking about ways to save myself. The coffin lid hadn't been nailed shut yet, so worrying about it now was pointless. Besides, I'd already checked my surroundings, there were no obvious control systems, and not much room to move around. It felt like I was in a spacecraft like an escape pod. The exterior was unknown. But the interior didn't look very technological either. Could this be like those sci-fi movies and TV shows where, after death, a person is placed in a coffin and flung into outer space? Just like the sea burials of the Age of Discovery, the space age would have space burials? Because the original owner of this body was dead, I had the opportunity to take over, or was I actually a Saiyan, stuffed into a single-person space capsule, dropped onto a remote planet, and tasked with conquering it? Unfortunately, I couldn't feel if I had a tail, and because my body was tightly encased in the seat, I couldn't reach out and touch it, to confirm. Thinking of Akira Toriyama's character design in Dragon Ball, I can't help but complain. While he downplayed Earth's military might, suggesting that a baby could conquer the world, he intended to highlight the gap between the Saiyans and Earth. But would a baby who couldn't even grasp the situation know they were coming to conquer the world? A pacifier might have been enough. While the Dragon Ball manga didn't use a pacifier to conquer the protagonist, it was almost the same. This flawed plot is a product of its time. Even 10 years later, or even in the new century, there wouldn't have been such a scenario of sending a baby to conquer the world. It's like the Demon King sending his daughter to fight the heroic squad. This act of sending a chauvinist from afar is like using his daughter to assassinate him. Amidst these complaints, the people in the escape pod, or small spaceship, saw half of the aquamarine planet through the viewfinder, growing larger and larger. It's called half because the other half is dark, facing the sun's shadow. However, within that dark half, one can see large-scale artificial lighting, making the darkness seem less dark. It seems we've entered the technological age. At least we don't have to worry about encountering primitive people who eat raw meat and drink blood, or medieval people who burn people at the stake. Circling the Earth, numerous high-orbiting satellites flash by along the way. Amidst the endless chatter, the people in the cabin forgot to question their origins and watch their small spacecraft plunge into the atmosphere. Sparks from the intense friction ignited, turning the view outside the viewing window a crimson red, but the cabin remained comfortable. Even the turbulence often depicted in movies seemed non-existent, and of course, there was no sense of G-force. From this alone, one could tell that the technology on board was far superior to the Earth they once lived on. Otherwise, without a spacesuit, they would have been tormented to death. But then the thought was quickly dismissed. Because this thing didn't land using the sophisticated, stable vertical takeoff and landing method, it just plowed through the ground. Okay, that landing method was pretty rough, but the lack of noticeable difference in the interior made it hard to judge its technological level. Or perhaps one of my thoughts was correct. This thing wasn't a spaceship, but an escape pod or a cosmic coffin. So, what was I? Well, I was about to see a classic scene. A group of clearly evolved monkeys dragged me out of this cosmic coffin. Was I back on Earth in the future, where apes rise and humanity falls? Fortunately, that imagined, worrying scene didn't materialize. It didn't take long before a group of modern humans arrived, opened the hatch, and pulled me out of this mysterious spacecraft. The landing site was dark, in a snowy area. A group of large men in thick, snow-white coats spoke in a mumbling Russian language. I was about to say, Beng Chu, Divari, to greet him, but instead, he burst into tears. Though he was crying, he finally realized his situation after being freed from the cushions. Despite his short stature, he wasn't some stunted dwarf, he was practically a baby. And, this damn weather was so cold. Chapter 2, Confinement in Siberia. Q. Do aliens have human rights? A. When a warship is stationary in Earth's orbit, all guns trained on the ground, aliens have plenty of human rights. Even imperial power is negotiable. But if a lone individual arrives on Earth, Forget human rights, their treatment is likely the same as that of a lab rat. This is the situation the time traveler codenamed Nyono Odin is currently in. A sealed, dayless room. It's far from comfortable, with just a bed, a sink, and a toilet. It's reminiscent of those prison cells you've seen in movies and TV. I say reminiscent because ordinary prisons don't go to the trouble of painting white, changing the sheets, and scrubbing the steel sink and toilet to look like mirrors. And the room itself is even larger than the house I bought with a 30-year mortgage in my previous life. It's just unfurnished and without partitions, the interior is as drab as a bare-bones house. And in this room, Nyono Odin doesn't even have the power to turn on or off the lights. The light switch was controlled by the white-coated researchers outside. Our protagonist, from childhood, had only two clothing styles, naked, and a white straight dress. Compared to the scrubs worn by hospital patients, the only difference was that her butt wasn't exposed. As a baby, she was fed dairy products. But after weaning, her diet was a monotonous, nutritious meal. It wasn't filling, and it tasted terrible. Her cell was so clean that even catching cockroaches, mice, or geckos wasn't enough to satisfy her hunger. The only thing she could find was the unflushed feces in the toilet. Well, this was too much of a challenge. Our time traveler wasn't that hungry, so she pressed the flush button. This was something she could control. She wasn't deprived by the white coats and forced to live with feces. Besides the 3 meals and the turning on and off of the lights to mark the passage of time, there was no other time or day-keeping device in sight. The temperature barely fluctuated, maintaining a near-constant temperature throughout the room, with no discernible change from spring to summer, autumn, or winter. Anyway, thanks to the straight skirt that looked like nothing at all and the thin blanket on my bed, I wasn't likely to catch a cold or get sick. Speaking of illness, I hadn't really gotten sick in all those countless years, whether major or minor. But I couldn't really call myself healthy either. I was in a sub-healthy state, barely starving but barely full, almost every day. Communication with others was almost non-existent. Except for the regular blood draws and physical exams, no one interacted with me. Even in my presence, others were cautious, trying not to reveal any unnecessary information. Incidentally, the cell was cleaned while I was away for the physical exam. Any marks or belongings I left behind, including uneaten or deliberately leftover food, were removed during this time. Or perhaps it was taken away for research? After a few experiences, those in prison stopped doing these unnecessary things. Initially, the alien, who had traveled through time, was puzzled by the situation. Why didn't anyone want to talk to me or get any information? But eventually, he figured it out. Communication presupposes that the other party has the information they seek. What valuable information could I, picked up as a baby, possibly hold? Could I discuss what it's like to travel through space as an infant in that spacecraft? Or perhaps question the technology of my home planet? Could I expect such questions from a being with only memories of infancy? So, the truly valuable things about me are the craft that brought me to Earth, and myself, this alien. No wonder everyone who approaches me treats me with such caution, as if facing a formidable enemy. Almost all of them wear airtight protective suits before coming into close contact. Those who are merely in white coats can only be seen through large glass windows. I've considered chatting with them, expressing my feelings about being born under the red flag and my yearning for great men and a harmonious society. But considering that I've experienced something so outrageous, so outlandish that it only appears in novels, it's hard to say whether this Earth is the one I'm familiar with. Although the species I saw were still typical Slavs, not apes, gorillas, or baboons, and their speech sounded like Maozi, not Eagle, Japanese, or German. But I wouldn't bet on whether their scalpels would fall if they knew I was somehow obtaining intelligence about Earth. Because in this isolated environment, I'd somehow managed to gain access to outside intelligence. Anyone would want to find a reason, right or wrong. If I were to misreport the situation or the wrong person, I'd have to dissect it even if I didn't want to. As the saying goes, a dead alien is a good alien. In a harmonious society, the only way to survive is to avoid challenging the iron fist of the authorities. People who are used to being submissive, working 996 hours, almost like 007, certainly don't have the romanticism of the French, ready to rise up at the drop of a hat. After a lifetime of hard work, I finally realized that asking an aunt for support is the best path. Although I'm no longer being kept by my aunt, and there's no anime to watch, no games to play, no phone to chat with, No fat Nord's happy water, and no fried food and skewers to soothe me. There's nothing to complain about. I thought this isolation, with its regular checkups and blood draws, would last until my natural death. Unexpectedly, things changed after my body reached a bottleneck. The white coats, as if freed from some kind of restraint, tormented the aliens with all their might. Bash, cuts, punctures, burns, all manner of torture techniques I'd never seen, or even heard of, were employed. The torture instruments were, of course, bizarre. The white coats' purpose wasn't to interrogate me, torture itself was their goal. Perhaps they wanted to understand the aliens' more detailed bodily functions, such as their recovery and immunity. For example, electrocution, or endurance, wasn't a consideration. The white coats simply wanted to determine what voltage would scorch the affected area or cause unconsciousness. At first, the injuries were minor, limited to experiments on various parts of the body, such as the limbs and torso. Then, they became increasingly severe, even breaking arm and leg bones to test the healing abilities of bones. As a seasoned time traveler, I'd never experienced anything like this. Before my time travel, all I'd endured was accumulated fatigue, mental stress, and anxiety about life, nothing more. Looking back now, that little bit of stress was truly insignificant. At least I relaxed, accepted my fate, and adapted to that kind of life. But direct physical damage is a completely different story. And judging by the gradual worsening of the injuries, while they're currently only temporary and healable, it wouldn't be surprising to see them remove my limbs or extract some organ. Or perhaps I'd start using myself as a parasite, tormented by all sorts of bacteria and viruses. Ultimately, there were only two options, specimen or biopsy. Disappointingly, I wouldn't have the choice. Honestly, though, it's hard to say which is more painful, the isolation and loneliness of my formative years or this relentless physical torture. Tom Hanks, at least on his island adventure, had Wilson, the ball, to keep him company. I, however, have nothing. If it weren't for the memories of my past life, the cherished and recurring works of art and entertainment like movies, animation, novels, and music that were once considered mental poison, I don't know how I could have survived that time without going mad. But the physical torture now inflicted on this time traveler, whose spirit was already on the verge of collapse, only pushed him from one abyss to another. Despair began to brew. I studied diligently for over a decade, became a seasoned worker in society, and yet my sins remain heavy. So, is the king of hell demanding that I pay for my sins in such a gruesome way in his lifetime? The time traveler, codenamed Nyono Odin, didn't know exactly how long he had been in this world. He only knew that one day, the lights stopped turning off, and no food was delivered. He felt as if he had been abandoned. Even though the tap was full, the starvation, lacking other food sources, still overwhelmed his chronically malnourished and tortured body. His arm was still in a splint. Add to that the constant light, though not as bright as the high-wattage torture lamps used for interrogation, and the mental fatigue from the lack of rest pushed him to his limit. At this moment, he felt a sense of servility as he yearned for the recent days of torture, nearly utterly suicidal. If anyone could hear him, he'd have wanted to scream in his native tongue, "Kill me or chop me up, but give me a last-minute meal." In this shabby place, even digging up grass roots, gnawing on tree bark, or eating guanine oil was impossible. It was only at this point that he finally remembered he could eat his own flesh. But there wasn't much flesh left in his skinny hands or feet, and he no longer had the strength to chew, so he couldn't even eat himself. His thoughts faltered without warning, and he suddenly passed out. Both his heartbeat and breathing gradually slowed. This condition continues to progress until the heart stops completely and the person stops breathing. The only thing to be thankful for is that you've already passed out, so you don't have to experience this slow death. It was better in your previous life. By the time you realize it, you're completely unaware. Your last memory of this life is simply "I'm so hungry." Chapter 3 Director's Log. Siberia, Secret Research Institute number 40,120,191. Director Petroslav's Log. April 20, 1970, a few days ago, a massive meteorite crashed in Siberia. Local garrison troops, after an on-site investigation, discovered an advanced spacecraft, clearly neither Chinese nor American. Inside, they found a baby. Following orders from superiors, an alien research center was established around the crash site. The baby, codenamed Alien 1, was secretly protected and studied. June 26, 1974, Some idiot actually proposed dissecting our only living specimen. How did this guy get assigned to my institute? Did some high-ranking official in KGB have his son born to a prostitute and then shove him into my institute just to gain seniority? Damn that idiot. Instead of providing more research funding, he wants to deplete limited research resources. That guy must be a spy sent by the United States to come up with such a foolish proposal. I'm reporting him and asking the KGB to investigate him. Even the specific females whose sperm has migrated into must be discovered. This foolish bloodline must be completely eradicated. August 14, 1976, Alien 1 is already 6 years old. Observations of whose growth cycle show it to be similar to that of a human, and various physical signs confirm this. The only thing we can't figure out is how much he eats. Some researchers suggest providing him with adequate nutrition to see how far he can grow. However, others worry that allowing Alien 1 to grow freely might lead to uncontrollable changes. Mutants have already caused enough trouble. Until effective control methods are found, limiting Alien 1's development is the best option. Of these two opinions, I choose the conservative one. Besides the concern about losing control, this is the only living specimen. I don't want to lose this precious specimen due to unnecessary pressure from unpredictable expectations. This isn't the demon summoning experiment conducted by Tsarist Russian rebels and German Nazis off the coast of Scotland in 1944. The original intention was to summon a powerful demon to wreak havoc within the heart of the Allied forces. The result was only a demon baby. What a joke. I heard that the baby has been trained by American scientists to be a soldier against supernatural forces. Using demons for these things is perfectly natural. But I only have an alien, no one can expect him to be as skilled as a demon. Train him as a soldier? Let the idiot who proposed this proposal use the funds from Project Winter Soldier or Project Red Room. As long as there's more funding to provide safeguards, I'll agree to such a foolish undertaking. February 19, 1980, the higher-ups are quite dissatisfied with the Institute's results. They still haven't been able to decipher the technology in the flight module, nor replicate its materials. They haven't been able to extract anything truly remarkable from Alien Number 1. The super soldier serum had long ago given up on the materials it could extract from Alien Number 1. Neither the blood nor the spinal fluid possess any superhuman enhancements. Furthermore, judging by Alien Number 1's X-rays, if given to uninformed doctors, they'd simply say it's a normal, human skeleton. If they were shown other vital data, they'd probably only conclude that this child was chronically malnourished. In fact, if I hadn't known this child was an alien who crashed to Earth in an advanced spacecraft, I would have come to the same conclusion. But now, I can't help but doubt this claim. To verify it, I even used my connections to question the soldiers who first discovered the alien. Various indications led me to suspect they had swapped the aliens in the spacecraft. All they found was an ordinary human child. But after cross-examination, they only concluded that Alien Number 1 had indeed been carried from that spacecraft. Is this supposed to prove that humanity originated from outer space, a science fiction fairy tale? Or is it trying to prove something else? Unfortunately, philosophical explorations don't yield satisfactory results. I need to deliver something more convincing. September 30, 1983, although my country wasn't directly involved in the mutant war in Egypt, we indirectly gained considerable intelligence, particularly regarding the terrifying abilities displayed during the battle. For this reason, all transhuman research institutes receive directives from their superiors, and our progress has once again been criticized. Over a decade of funding has yielded no results. Are these idiots hoping to achieve something like, replacing one's own blood with a virgin's blood will grant eternal youth, and then drain my only sample? They might as well just study some vampires, of which there are plenty in Eastern Europe. I believe Alien Number 1 must hold the secrets of human evolution, otherwise, their appearance and physical features wouldn't be so similar to ours. It's just that I haven't found the right approach yet. Perhaps current technology isn't able to observe what we should be observing. Perhaps I should start with genetics and explore more nuanced areas. Otherwise, I simply cannot imagine an alien race whose technology supports the ability to travel through space in small aircraft wouldn't consider developing biotechnology to extend lifespan and enhance the body. The secrets of that body are definitely more valuable than that flight capsule. To ensure continued research, I had to compromise with my superiors and hand over the alien flight capsule. The Institute has yet to fully reverse engineer the technology on the spacecraft. Most importantly, Aside from necessary sampling, I don't want to cause excessive damage. My approach is the same as with Alien Number 1. It's just that my superiors don't seem to approve of this approach. Especially since the U.S. Strategic Defense Initiative, announced in March, calls for a major development of military capabilities in outer space, making progress on the relevant materials and plans even more urgent. To continue research on Alien Number 1, handing over the spacecraft is a necessary compromise. They will also be transferring related researchers and streamlining the Institute's organizational structure. In exchange, the Institute's funding won't be directly deducted from the spacecraft research, but will be slightly reduced. This means more funds can be invested in Alien Number 1 research. Hopefully, this price will lead to some breakthroughs. December 8, 1986, the leadership's shift in direction sounds good, but I'm not quite so convinced. The specific criticism isn't the focus of this record, but I simply hope it won't affect the Institute's operations. Clearly, that's wishful thinking. To support the new course, superiors forced the closure of many unsuccessful projects and redirected funds. The Alien Research Institute was unfortunately placed on a watch list, and the pressure to delay was imminent. Fortunately, Alien 1 had reached adolescence and should have reached a certain level of physical development. Therefore, I had to agree to some experiments I hadn't dared to attempt before, using extreme methods to test the body's functions. I hoped this shift would bring me some progress. January 7, 1988, this damned policy not only affected my homeland, but also the Allies. The halter on the German wolf was loosening. Did anyone see? The Institute's funding and supply were also in trouble. Food, which used to be rationed, now had to be purchased with rubles, and the price was getting higher and higher. I suspected that if things continued like this, a single loaf of black bread would cost 500,000 Reichsmarks, and that would happen to my beloved homeland. Therefore, I had to contact some old friends and, through them, raise funds and supplies on my own. There's hope for Alien Number 1. His remarkable healing abilities aren't as impressive as those of mutants with natural healing abilities, but he can heal the same injuries much faster than a normal human, and most don't leave scars. Unfortunately, Alien Number 1's genetic profile remains undeciphered. Seeing this, I finally believe I'm holding an alien, not just an Earthling disguised as an alien. At least with current genetic technology, none of the proven methods can replicate Alien Number 1's genetic makeup. The only plausible explanation is that Alien Number 1's genetic makeup differs from Earth's. Even this discovery hasn't convinced the higher-ups to continue funding. They simply want something more practical, like the super soldier serum to produce more winter soldiers, or the cutting-edge technology that will make Project Fox possible. All I can do is try to trade my resources for something that will keep the research going. It's risky, and the funding isn't entirely legitimate. But I can't care less. The mystery of Alien Number 1 is like a goddess lifting a corner of her skirt before my eyes. All it needed was one crucial moment, one inspiration, one opportunity, or something completely different. November 9, 1989, damn it, the wall has fallen. The survival of the GDR is precarious. The voices of doubt are no longer what they once were, limited to a small, visionary elite. Even ordinary people are beginning to doubt their own situation. Why isn't it as rosy as the leaders promised, nor as prosperous as the West? I can't say whether my path is right, but something is definitely wrong. I hope someone with a brain will quickly clean up this mess. I feel like I'm on the verge of success. This is a crucial moment, and I can't be disturbed. August 1st, 1990, damn it. My former colleagues in the Cheka tell me I'm being targeted by the KGB. I'm loyal to my country, to my cause, and I'm working for a better future. Why should they stop me? Isn't there some plan brewing? Why must I be eliminated? I'm not leaving. I'm staying until the end. This is my final effort, and I won't give up easily. The diary entry for August 1st is the final record. Chapter 4 Explorers. Even in Siberia, summer temperatures can reach over 30 degrees Celsius, but that's in the more southerly regions. Within the Arctic Circle, it's still cold enough to require winter clothing for outdoor activities. However, those accustomed to such weather can easily head out in long sleeves and long pants. A few young people returning from the city were walking through the recently abandoned Siberian research base. The base wasn't large, and it took them just over an hour to fully explore it. Teapots, teacups, a gas stove, floor lamps, table lamps, and searchlights. It's safe to say the evacuees took only the essentials, leaving behind all the other essentials. While these items might seem insignificant for the manufacturing powerhouse that is the Red Empire, they were in high demand in this small, resource-scarce Siberian village. Then there were the filing cabinets, wardrobes, and cupboards, mostly made of wood, with a few made of iron. The sturdier wooden cabinets could replace older ones at home. The rickety ones could be chopped into firewood for the winter. The iron ones could be disposed of separately. They even found several rifles and a jeep that hadn't started. Even more surprising was their discovery of a food warehouse. While not entirely packed, flour, canned goods, and other items filled up nearly half the warehouse. Notably, the internal power and heating systems were still fully functional. Even without the abandoned supplies, the research base itself was extremely valuable. Unfortunately, no documents were found. It looked as if everything had been taken. If it weren't for the mess and signs of rummaging through the base, one would have suspected the occupants had temporarily left and would return. These signs gave the young men a deeper understanding of the base, beyond simply focusing on the abandoned supplies. As the search progressed deeper into the base, a strange doorway appeared before them. The lack of warning signs or prominent red lettering suggested that the doorway wasn't likely to be dangerous. The young men glanced at each other and decided to open it. Naturally, they turned their attention to the rotary valve on the door, which looked like a door-opening mechanism. As expected, the wheel valves controlled the bolts that moved up and down the front door. Furthermore, the base had been abandoned relatively recently, so the wheel valves hadn't rusted yet, making them effortless to turn. When all the bolts had been withdrawn, the large iron door swung open with a sharp creak. A large, bright room, painted in pure white, emerged, with no blind spots. The shiny iron-gray steel sink and toilet were the most striking features. Besides that, there was a person sprawled in the center of the room. How could someone be here? Is this person dead or alive? Countless questions swirled from the young people's lips. Clearly, no one had the answers. Their reaction, unsurprisingly, simply reflected their nervousness. After all, finding someone in a base believed to be deserted was bound to be a cause for alarm. So, they could only ask questions, hoping for answers to ease their nerves. But who could possibly have the answers? When the cycle of endless questions but no answers finally came to an end, everyone looked at each other in bewilderment. Finally, someone brave enough stepped forward and took a closer look at the man lying on the floor in the room in a strange position. The man was quite tall, but looked extremely skinny, obviously malnourished. His skin was a pale, bloodless color, and his hair, which was almost bald, looked black. It was hard to make out his eyes, as they had rolled up so that only the whites of his eyes could be seen. There was no noticeable rise and fall in his chest, but there was no pungent odor around. He sniffed the man on the ground and touched his neck, but in the end, he just shook his head. Seeing this movement, everyone knew that the man was not going to survive. What should we do? Leave him here? Someone asked. Everyone looked disgusted at such a suggestion. One of them said, I'm thinking of using this as a secret base. Leaving a dead body inside. Finally, the boldest young man, the leader, said, come and help. Carry him out and bury him. It'll put an end to this. Of course, the Russians and the Western world don't hold a burial rite. But the cheapest and cleanest way to dispose of a body is, of course, to dig a hole and bury it. Cremation requires fuel, and burial requires a sturdy coffin or a dedicated grave. All of these are more troublesome than digging a hole and burying a body. If the body were simply abandoned, with today's hygiene standards, it's obvious that it could lead to stench and plague. So, digging a hole and burying it was the easiest option. In this fantastical world, where rumors of mutants, vampires, werewolves, and zombies abound, the dead are the least frightening. As long as the body doesn't get up. So, once the decision was made to bury the body, the young men didn't hesitate. 2 of them worked by the hands, 2 by the feet, and 2 by the waist, carrying the body out and finding a place to bury it. As for digging tools, they were readily available. Although each person couldn't muster enough, burying the body wasn't a big deal. The only issue is depth. Too shallow, and wild animals would easily dig it up and eat it. Too deep would waste effort. However, the body was heavier than expected, and even the 6 men carrying it were exhausted. So much so that as they emerged from the underground research base, they failed to notice the slight changes in the body exposed to the sun. Sunlight is a precious commodity in Siberia during the summer, bringing warmth. Therefore, the group's route wasn't designed to avoid sunlight, but rather to follow a straight line, heading towards the woods outside the research base. The grounds of the research base were disguised as a normal settlement. This ensured that satellites and other high-altitude reconnaissance systems would be completely oblivious to any local activity. When the base was operational, even vehicles entering and leaving the base didn't use military trucks or other luxury vehicles that shouldn't be seen in such a place. Therefore, given this layout, there naturally existed a small church and cemetery, the typical features of a village. The young men planned to bury the body there. Even if the government officials returned, they wouldn't bother to count the extra pits in this cemetery, whether it was used as a disguise or for real use. Unbeknownst to them, under the scorching yellow sun, the suspected corpse in their hands began to resurface. Chapter 5, Dying and Sick. A fragment of DNA, incomprehensible to humans, began to function, transforming the unique wavelength of yellow sunlight into a form of energy, transmitting it throughout this nearly exhausted body. Don't mistake this cleansing of the bones and marrow, a rebirth, for a good thing. Such stimulation is more like pouring a basin of cold water into hot oil, causing it to explode. This converted energy doesn't simply increase the body's strength, it significantly enhances all senses and bodily functions, starting from the cellular level. The gentle breeze, like a battering ram, strikes the sensitive and fragile skin, transmitting its force deep into the body. Not only does it shake the internal organs, but it also cracks the bones. However, these damages are repaired in an incredibly short time, and the repaired parts are even stronger than before. This frail body is constantly strengthened through the alternating cycle of destruction and repair. And the ultra-high and ultra-low frequency sounds, too subtle for a normal person to notice and beyond the human range, similarly train and strengthen the eardrums and auditory nerves. Then there's smell, vision, touch, pain, and so on, distributed across every area of the skin. All of these senses interact with the outside world at a speed beyond human imagination. To cope with this complex sensory input, the brain's nerves constantly push their limits, strengthening and growing. It can be said that the forging of a steel body isn't inevitable, but rather a necessary improvement after these supersensory systems have been enhanced to handle this feedback. Without a steel body, it simply wouldn't be able to withstand the pressure these supersensory systems bring. It's like a chassis and drive shaft made of bamboo, unable to utilize the 800 horsepower, Formula One level engine and tire grip. The end result would be a car falling apart, not an astonishing performance. These incredibly sensitive cells, through this constant self-strengthening, adapt to the after effects of their oversensitivity. At the same time, these enhanced cells in various locations also acquire distinct functions. However, these functions still need to be properly developed. Just like a car with a powerful enough engine, a well-designed exterior, and appropriate components, can potentially function as a speedboat or airplane. If the enhancement process had a long adjustment period, perhaps the recipient wouldn't have suffered so much. But as mentioned earlier, this is like pouring cold water into a pot of hot oil. The reactions are intense and rapid. The pain is unimaginable to outsiders. Worse still, all of this is only a physical enhancement. While brain cells have been strengthened, the mindset hasn't changed or grown accordingly. It's like a supercomputer using old DOS system software and trying to run a AAA game. The hardware might be capable, but without the right software and hardware drivers, it's all in vain. The brain does have shutdown mechanisms, such as causing a person to faint, but these are only triggered by overload and aren't truly a shutdown or reboot. While the person undergoing the transformation has a superbrain and neurons capable of processing this information, their logical thinking hasn't changed. Therefore, a brain that hasn't been pushed to its limits wouldn't react in this way. What's happening now is a chaotic jumble of information swirling through his mind. The optic and auditory nerves were misaligned, and the olfactory region was vying for territory with the memory and emotional regions. This was far different from simply a situation where memory was distorted or external stimulation was too intense, causing nerves to become overloaded and send out warning signals in the form of pain. Truth be told, the situation the transformed person was facing was even worse. His brain wasn't functioning as it should, but was actually hindering it. His strengthened organs and muscles were resilient, otherwise, under the control of his disordered brain, they might have rebelled. Fortunately, the worst didn't happen. His entire body, seemingly guided by instinct, was functioning normally as a human. However, the signs of this were minimal and unspoken. So, the young Russians carrying the corpse were about to resurrect if they hadn't noticed what they were holding. The switch was that they had reached their destination and roughly dumped the corpse on the ground. Several people began searching for land and tools to prepare for burial. Whether it was the air movement or the parts of the body the young men were holding, it all brought a terrifying thrill to the unconscious man. For ordinary people, this blow was no less powerful than a heavy bomb exploding nearby. If that didn't cause death, then the man was probably truly dead. So, unsurprisingly, well, quite unexpectedly for the young men, the corpse thrown to the ground suddenly sat up with a startled roar. Such a sudden change of events would have frightened them to death. Among all the strange rumors and inhuman enemies, the most troublesome were the zombies, because someone was already dead. No one knew how to kill them again. A headshot? If that didn't work, they would be the next to die. Before the young men could figure out what to do, the resurrected corpse fled, leaving the group of living people looking at each other in bewilderment. The awakened man's mind was still confused. It was only his body's instincts that controlled him, just like hitting the knee or the crook of the hand with a hammer and having the foot or hand jump up on its own. It had nothing to do with the brain, it was simply a nervous reaction. So his running was simply an instinctive pursuit of energy, the yellow sun's rays. It was like a hungry person chasing a scent, a thirsty person seeking water. Of course, this pursuit involved no deliberate destruction. Any shadowy terrain was out of his reach. No crashing into trees or rocks along the way. It was simply one man, galloping away at astonishing speed. By the time he reached the end of the land, the runner was completely naked. His cotton hospital gown, no match for the wind, had ripped and ripped apart in the process. The end of the land wasn't the end of his run. With a single bound, he leaped from the cliff to the sea, treading water. His speed wasn't much slower than on land. Instead, the shock waves of breaking the sound barrier sent monstrous waves surging out to either side, like a speedboat gliding across the water. Only the impact and speed of this speedboat weighed at least 10,000 tons. But as the waves grew lower and lower, the runner's speed also slowed down. Finally, he stopped at a shore and fell on the beach soaked by the cold sea water. Chapter 6, Salvation. What does it feel like to wake up hungry? It's like your stomach being clamped in a vice, spinning 360 degrees, 720 degrees, endlessly. It's the kind of pain that makes you grit your teeth, hold your stomach, and curl up like a cooked shrimp. Of course, the person who wakes up doesn't think about how lucky they are to have woken up hungry. They simply intuitively sense the difference in their surroundings, the different bedding, the different view of the room. But they don't think much about it, they just see and feel it. Wake up, stranger, the hoarse voice came from a thin, white-haired old man. His mustache was probably the only thing he had that was meticulously groomed. The rest of his appearance, while not slovenly, wasn't particularly well groomed either. He sat by the dead fireplace, holding a clear glass filled with cheap amber whiskey. So, was that him speaking just now? The thoughts that returned to the internet only brought a tingling sensation to his head, almost making him forget the cramps in his stomach. The brain, now reorganized and managed, was free of the previous confusion. Whether the awakened person had adapted or their superpowers had temporarily shut down, they seemed to have returned to normal, observing their surroundings intently. So, the old man had stopped speaking Maozi and switched to Eagle language? As someone who'd grown up with exam-oriented education, he'd learned Eagle language. Unfortunately, his grades were so poor that he'd missed some of the normal conversation, and 9 out of 10 sentences were incomprehensible. Just now, the old man was asking himself if he'd woken up. Right? Huh? How come he understood this time? His thoughts suddenly took a turn, and another sharp pain in his head made him grit his teeth. While the old man's greeting went unanswered, he was treated to a dazzling display of facial expressions. First, a look of idiocy, then a face wrinkled like a chrysanthemum in pain. Then, a look of bewilderment, a mixture of confusion and surprise. Finally, a face drooping with pain. The old man began to wonder if he'd picked up a mental patient. These days, aside from those who are clearly not human, the most untouchable are the mentally ill. Thinking this, he reached for the shotgun hidden in the corner of his chair, ready to unleash a round at any moment should a patient attack him. The person who finally woke up remembered how starving they were. He saw a roll of bread and cold French fries by the bed, and without a second thought, he grabbed handfuls and stuffed them into his mouth. A normal stomach, after a long period of starvation, would only tolerate liquids, otherwise indigestion would cause them to vomit. But with his iron stomach, he could digest even actual iron, let alone bread and fries. The portion on the plate wasn't large, so he devoured it in a few bites. But the eating process wasn't exactly pleasant. Starting from the mouth, the entire digestive system's organs and cells were once again upgraded, guided by their supersensory abilities. Otherwise, the cells would collapse from the stimulation. At the same time, the cellular upgrades, the taste stimulation brought by the food, and all the changes in the eating process, all this information flooded into the brain. Fortunately, the brain, now fully online and cooperating, did not let this stimulation and change cause the body to completely lose control. It was simply a chaotic influx of information, causing a period of confusion in the mind. The awakened person took some time to sort out their thoughts and adjust to all this stimulation. It felt like the moment food entered the mouth, the entire process was like a film being transformed into pictures, playing frame by frame. And then, each picture was accompanied by a detailed annotation. Information, both necessary and unnecessary, was crammed into the brain. This flood of information seemed redundant, but in fact, there were considerable blind spots. It's like when you put French fries in your mouth, you can tell that the majority of it is starch, but there are many distinguishable flavors and components, the details of which are unknown. It's not that this world doesn't have these component analyses, it's just that I don't know them. Neither this self in this world nor in the previous one has any relevant memories. It's like a puzzle that should be complete, but several pieces are missing, leaving large gaps. This situation was naturally confusing, even a little irritating. But somehow, this emotion acted like a stabilizer, allowing chaotic thoughts to find a thread, to unravel and organize everything into a set of rules, rather than letting them spiral out of control. In reality, the old man saw everything unfold in a fraction of a second, as he watched the man on the bed regain his composure. Then, he realized he was naked. Frightened like a little girl, he pulled the blanket over his chest. The old man was speechless at this gesture. He couldn't remain silent, so he explained, "When I found you yesterday, you were lying naked on the beach, being washed by the sea. I figured no one would bathe like that, so I dragged you to my car and brought you back. Drying your nearly hypothermic body and throwing it onto my only bed took all my energy. You can't expect a dying old man to help you get dressed." As he spoke, the old man threw a set of clothes on the bed. "I see you don't have any other luggage, so just wear this set of clothes." It was obvious that in his previous life, he had only watched American TV series with free resources, and he still had to find the subtitled versions. But after the old man's conversation just now, he seemed to understand everything. Without saying a word, he grabbed the shirt and tried to put it on. However, he hadn't adapted to this damn strength yet, and he couldn't control it well. When he put the clothes on from his head, they tore them to pieces. Looking at the strips of cloth hanging on his body, even the most basic covering function was broken. The person on the bed and the old man looked at each other in embarrassment. Without thinking much, the old man grabbed another piece of clothes from a pile of clothes that he didn't know whether they were washed or not and threw it to him. Judging from the smell, the clothes were washed, just not folded properly. This time, the person wearing the clothes knew how to control his strength. He put the clothes on carefully. Then he pulled his pants under the bedclothes and put them on. Although he had no underwear to wear, he didn't care. The clothes belonged to an old man, and were actually a size too small for the person in the bed. But since the person who had just woken up was so skinny, they were wearable, with only a small part of the cuffs and trouser legs showing. Please read, bookmark, and recommend my new book. Thanks. Chapter 7, New Life. The dressed man saw a glass of water next to the empty plate. This time he learned his lesson, carefully picked up the fragile glass, and drank the rich and strange-tasting white water in one gulp. "Boy, I'm John Brown." "Who are you?" the old man asked. "Who am I?" During the time he was in solitary confinement, he had already seen from those overly bright wash basins that he looked not like the yellow man with the black hair and black eyes in his memory. His hair was still black, but his eyes were a distinct blue. His skin was not the rosy white of the yellow people, but the dead white of the white people. Simply put, he was no longer the person he was before he traveled through time. So was there any point in using his old Chinese name? In this life, he was called Nyono Odin by those mount eyes. Although he didn't know the original meaning, he knew it was probably a rather unorthodox code name, which made him instinctively not want to continue using it. Now that he was a foreigner, he might as well use a foreign name. He stumbled back, using the Hawk language he remembered. "My name is Henry." He'd pick a name for the market. He didn't want to draw attention to himself. That was his stated thought. As for why he chose that name, he didn't know. A good mood? Intuition? As long as he felt good, did he need to explain himself? Henry what? The old man asked for his surname. Did he mean to make up a surname? So annoying. I gave him the last thought. He shook his head and said, nothing, just Henry. Old John had no intention of probing further, simply saying, whatever. Then, suddenly, he asked in Maozi, is there somewhere we can go? Henry gave him a look of bewilderment that didn't seem fake. Nonsense, I really don't understand. Trucking back to Hawk language, old John asked again, is there somewhere we can go? As if aware of the young man's Hawk language sluggishness, he deliberately slowed down his pace. Henry, understanding this time, gave a bewildered look and shook his head. I think so. Old John stood up and picked up the shotgun. But he held the gun by the middle part, not the handle and trigger. He continued, if you have nowhere to go, you can stay. But that bed is mine, I can let you sleep on the sofa in the bar. But if you want to stay, you have to work for me. I will provide you with 3 meals a day, and you have to pay for drinks if you want. When you are ready, you can come out. The bar is in front. If you want to leave, the food and clothes just now are just gifts for you. But don't expect me to provide you with anything else. With that, old John walked out, gun in hand. Where else could he go? His appearance had changed. Even if he returned home, he couldn't use that identity and take back his life. He hadn't even considered whether his former self still existed, could be replaced, or even whether this place was still the world he once lived in. The spaceship had already emerged, and he had gone through that lonely and torturous second growth period. Henry would rather believe that this was not the safe and peaceful world he had lived in. Before encountering the time traveler's artifact, he had only heard rumors of Area 51, read news about the war in the Middle East, and bought American specialties for free. Unlike this world, his first impression was so strange and terrifying. Besides, who knows how much time had passed? It couldn't have been just a few years since he grew from a baby to his current appearance. As soon as this thought emerged, a number appeared in his mind. 7,427. This was the number of days that had passed since he appeared in outer space and was about to land on Earth, until he starved himself to death and fell into coma. Despite the monotony of these 7,000 days, they were vividly remembered. He could remember exactly what day he was taken, what experiments he underwent, what physical examinations he underwent, and what the responsible person looked like. He could still remember everything. He couldn't understand what they said, but every word was as clear as if it had just been spoken. Even the various tortures and broken limbs he experienced during his formative years felt as if they had just happened. Whenever he recalled them, the corresponding part of his body would ache. Henry quickly shook his head, trying to forget, or rather, to focus his attention elsewhere. He had experienced the side effects of having an overly active brain. So, if he counted from the day he traveled through time, he had already spent nearly 20 years in this world. With the average human lifespan being 70, that meant he had already spent nearly 30% of that time. Or had he wasted the most precious growth period? What a miserable start. I'm too exhausted to complain. Henry thought to himself. Instead of worrying about how to get back, he should think about how to live a good life here. After all, before crossing over, I'd just been content with what I had. The only thing I could still cherish was the memory of the D slot. Besides the dedication of the various teachers, there were also the anime and movies I'd watched, the games I'd played. If I wanted those things, I could just collect them again. It wasn't necessary to get my own back. It dawned on me. I hadn't cleared my browsing history, and I still had those D-slot collections. If anyone saw them, I'd be socially dead. My good reputation from my past life? Never mind. Death is death, it doesn't matter. I can still be a rotten mess wherever I go. Since I've given myself a new name, I might as well start a new life. Henry, realizing this, opened the door to the room and was greeted by a rather large bar. 6 four-person tables were sparsely arranged in the middle, and along the walls were long tables with small sofas and cubicles. Besides the tables and chairs, there were 2 old pool tables and 3 dartboards riddled with holes. Even the wall next to the dartboards bore the marks of darts. And then, on one unusual wall, hung some old military photos and Captain America's shield. From the bar's overflowing shelves of alcoholic beverages, with neither milk nor juice in sight or smell, It was clear this wasn't a place for a family gathering. So why the two-dimensional decoration? Henry approached the elderly man serving customers at the bar, pointed at the star-shaped round shield, and asked, "Do you have grandchildren living here?" Old John's heart sank at the question. He asked, "Why do you say that, if you don't have grandchildren? Who put a Captain America shield on the wall?" Henry's hawkspeak became fluent. "I bought a replica. During World War II, I almost joined the Howling Commandos. Although I didn't make it, I saw them in action quite a few battles, being able to fight alongside a hero like the Captain. Is there anything wrong with me hanging up his shield to commemorate him? Madfuck. Where did I get into this? New book, please read, collect, and recommend it, thank you. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 8 Where Am I? Old John's bar wasn't busy at all, the old man could easily handle it alone. Still, he took Henry in, assigning him to odd jobs around the bar. He had to clear tables and chairs, clean, and provide the gluttons 3 meals a day. Henry hadn't expected such a large appetite. While other people counted steaks by the ounce, he went straight to the pound. And with his savory manner, no one would doubt Henry could finish a whole roasted cow in one sitting. Others might finish a plate full of mashed potatoes, perhaps with a little broccoli. But he could devour a whole pot of pig feed, something even the locals despised. Perhaps it was because he'd never been able to eat enough at every meal, and now that he had the chance, he couldn't help himself and, of course, ate to his heart's content. But old John never said anything. After he finished, he continued. In the end, it was Henry who felt embarrassed. What kind of background did he have? Although he was used to playing the bad boy, he still understood the ways of the world. To repay the favor, Henry naturally tried to help as much as he could. Although there wasn't much to do in this shabby tavern. Thanks to his memories from before the time travel, he quickly became familiar with the unfamiliar Eagle language. Whether reading, writing, or speaking, it felt like his native tongue, and he could understand without having to mentally convert it into his own. The only differences between him and the local Americans were the accent and the use of slang. These, too, he quickly adapted to through conversations with old John and the townspeople. Henry didn't deliberately try to hide his identity. After all, he was helping out at old John's tavern. Even if business was slow, he still had to deal with some regulars. In a place like this, a stranger inevitably needed an introduction, otherwise, it would be difficult to integrate. As for the extra strength and sensory abilities this body had acquired after leaving the research institute, they weren't a problem for Henry. Again, this was due to his pre-time travel habits. A key part of his slacking off strategy was to minimize his presence. To avoid the attention of his bosses and superiors, he naturally hoped they wouldn't focus on him, just that he'd remember to pay his salary every month. Therefore, for Henry, moving quietly and lightly was almost instinctive. Even though his strength had increased immensely, as long as he was careful and cautious in his daily life, he didn't have to worry about damaging anything with his extra power and attracting attention. This was even more true for his sensory abilities, which had been enhanced countless times. Knowing how to ignore everything, the art of feigning death was ingrained in his bones. He didn't even have to worry about absorbing so much information from the outside world that it would overwhelm his brain. Ignoring unnecessary information wasn't a skill, excluding useful information as well, that was the pinnacle of feigning death. His sense of smell was even more flawless. In a room full of orchids, one will no longer smell the fragrance. In a shop selling abalone, one will no longer smell the stench. This is a proverb passed down from our ancestors. Simply put, getting used to smelling wasn't a problem. Now it was just a matter of being able to smell more. A sudden odor would be irritating, no matter how sensitive one's sense of smell was. But once one got used to it, it would be a minor issue. And taste. Henry wasn't some child who'd stuff anything he got his hands on. A more sensitive palate would make eating a pleasure, or torture, but that wasn't a big deal. In short, the improvements this body had demonstrated were easy enough to live like a normal person, as long as I didn't push them to their limits. As for testing their limits, why would I do that? As long as I could perform at a normal human level, did it matter where my limits lay? I wasn't about to challenge Purple Sweet Potato Spirit in a back and forth game to see who'd fall first. Henry had speculated about his origins. First, being a Saiyan was out of the question, as they lacked tails and wouldn't transform into a giant monkey upon seeing a full moon. Then there was the idea that he was from another planet. Although he looked human, he loved basking in the sun. And while basking in the sun, he could feel his various aspects strengthened. With all these characteristics, a single term naturally came to mind: Superman. Or perhaps, Kryptonian. Damn, had I come to the wrong place? He had this question because he'd already heard from Old John and other residents of the town that Captain America had indeed existed in this world. Everyone also brought out their own collections of evidence, like Captain America character cards, news bulletins, and so on. Old John even had a wartime photo of him and Captain America. These items were very old, so their authenticity was undeniable. Secondly, while there weren't any familiar superheroes besides Captain America, there were mutants in this world, and plenty of them. The rivalry between the X-Men and the Brotherhood of Mutants frequently appeared in tabloids. If the situation got serious enough, major newspapers would also cover it. For example, the Cuban crisis in the 1960s and the mutant war in Egypt in 1983, regardless of whether the newspapers considered mutants a threat or not, gave them considerable coverage. To this day, the constant presence of mutants around us serves as a reminder that this world doesn't belong solely to ordinary humans. And vampires and werewolves are no longer just bedtime stories or film and television tropes. They often create monsters like zombies and wipe out entire towns, constantly appearing in the tabloids. The U.S. government's ambiguous stance on whether to suppress such news suggests something else. They didn't want to escalate the issue, nor did they want the public to remain in the dark. Hence, the yearly debate over gun control saw no progress. This wasn't just about Happy America shooting every day, it was simply because the world was truly too dangerous. If ordinary people weren't even allowed to own guns, they would be treated like chickens by those outsiders. And then, one last, important point. The year was 1990, and Henry was in an unnamed town in Alaska, USA. When answering this question, Old John inexplicably added Earth to the end, indicating the town's location. Henry didn't care whether Old John had noticed anything, and neither did Old John. He was a World War II veteran, and both of his sons had died in Vietnam. Both had married, but neither had children. The eldest had died of illness early, and the second had lost contact, rumored to have remarried. In short, Old John was truly alone, with no ties to his family. And so, he managed this little tavern, managing to get through all those years. He is not afraid of Henry's appetite. He just occasionally reminds others that he is not stupid. Please read, collect and recommend the new book. Thank you. Chapter 9, Walter White's Art of Speaking. The bar was quite empty, that was a fact. This unassuming town was relatively quiet, with the young people having left to seek work elsewhere, leaving only the elderly to linger. Therefore, the people who frequented the bar were locals, familiar faces. Old John was often busy with other matters. Customers would familiarly handle their glasses and pour their own drinks. Sometimes, they'd simply grab a can of beer and find the bottle opener themselves. Then, they'd drop their money into the cash drawer on the bar. This was why Old John ran the bar alone. He didn't forbid anyone from coming on their own. Of course, there were some curses and swearing. For a proper meal, there was another restaurant in town. Old John didn't compete with the others, focusing solely on selling alcohol and simple side dishes. The town's elders were also very old-fashioned, so most of them only came to the bar for a small gathering at night. They wouldn't come in broad daylight to get drunk unless there was something special going on. They drank sparingly, usually with a can of beer or a similarly sized alcoholic beverage. If someone seems ready to drink themselves to death, it's easy to guess, without asking, that something sad is happening at home. If there are more than 2 people drinking heavily, it's a sign of joy. A little inquiries will reveal that help is needed, and those who can will. If they can't, everyone will tacitly allow each other some time to be alone. They're all older now, no longer the depressed teenagers who contemplate suicide when heartbreak strikes. Just give them some time to adjust. If it's something happy and worth celebrating, then there's no need to ask, they'll naturally want to share it. One situation did, however, change Henry's prejudice, the idea that white people don't understand the art of cursing. This stereotype is wrong. Perhaps American teenagers, deeply influenced by black culture, are prone to impulsiveness, preferring to pull out guns rather than engage in verbal rants. However, White people with redneck culture also have a rich repertoire of cursing. At least in a country where talk shows are so prevalent, to say they don't know how to be sarcastic is a bit self-deceptive. More than once Henry heard something like, "Finally you've shown up like a human being again, instead of hiding somewhere else. I almost thought the bar was my home, you despicable bastard. Yeah, I'm surprised you could still come up to me and say something like that. I thought you were already 6 feet under me." Oh, that's what I hope will happen, not what will happen to you. When you walk through my door, just talk like a human being instead of mumbling like a jerk. Forget it. Give me a beer. 10 peels. What? 10 peels? Jesus Christ, old John, who are you, half Jewish or something? You keep raising the damn price. A can of beer has been raised to 10 peels, and it's been rising for 10 years. You stubborn Scottish son of a bitch, you should see a doctor if you have amnesia. Yeah, leave your change for future medical treatment. I'll take your money, donate it to the church, and ask the priest to reserve a plot for you to be buried. Such barbs were constant in the bar, happening 20 or 30 times a day. It had practically become old John's way of greeting everyone else. While political correctness was beginning to gain traction in America in the 1990s, it wasn't yet time to suppress white traditions. So, the black and racial memes he heard from these people were endless, and no one was spared. Admittedly, some of these remarks might not be understood by people from different cultural backgrounds. That's undeniable. While these things might be banned in public in a few decades, it didn't stop Henry from learning how to integrate into this old-fashioned society, living like a white American, not a street thug. After all, his appearance had already limited him to a certain range. Was there any benefit in behaving and talking like a black person? As for pretending to be a citizen of a nation of etiquette, as in his previous life, while actually living a subservient and servile life, he would only be looked down upon in this world. The town's older white men didn't find this boy gentle, refined, and polite. They just thought he was a wimp. The town's older white women were even worse, treating this burly young man like a effeminate, fragile girl. Being called a wimp was fine, it suited his life philosophy of playing dumb and playing dirty. But being called a sissy was unbearable, especially by a fujoshi, rotten girl, in her eyes. Isn't that just fujoshi? Even though the term rotten girl probably hadn't existed in this era, that doesn't mean there weren't such people. But for the third time, the bar was really empty. So most of the time, Henry spent his time watching the small, old CRT TV on the bar counter. Old John didn't have any pay channels, so besides the free news channels, he watched a constant stream of old movies and soap operas. Even though it was a color TV, it was showing black and white movies, but Henry was still captivated. He didn't watch these old movies to learn English or anything like that, he just felt pent up. For nearly 20 years, imprisoned in a darkened research facility by the Russians, he'd been deprived of even the most basic human interaction, let alone entertainment. For someone accustomed to solitude in a previous life, having no one to talk to wasn't a big deal. But lacking even the slightest entertainment was truly suffocating. Finally seeing the light of day again and being taken in by old John, Henry certainly didn't expect a life of luxury. Even if he wanted, this nameless town lacked the means. So, the old channels on that broken TV became his only salvation as a hidden homebody. It would be wonderful if the fat otaku were happy and content. Unfortunately, old John had already relented and provided him with ample food. This food, as if to make up for past losses, was constantly being absorbed by the body. Have you ever seen someone who only eats and doesn't poop, only drinks and doesn't urinate? Henry was in that situation. All food, once it entered his mouth, was converted to 100% efficiency by the body. No feces or urine were produced, so naturally, there was no need for poop or pee. At the same time, his thin figure kept changing, becoming stronger and stronger, and more muscular. The whole person was like a balloon, changing almost every day. Anyone who was careful could see it. As for old John's mentality, Henry could feel it to some extent. It's not that you can't take anything with you when you die, so if someone can use it, he won't feel bad at all. Anyway, in this broken place of Alaska, he can't save money to make himself a millionaire. No matter how much he loses, he won't lose everything. So for a kid who needs help, he doesn't hesitate to lend a hand. It has nothing to do with whether he is black or white, it's just that the future belongs to the young, not old people like him who have half a leg in the coffin. Please read, collect and recommend my new book, thank you. Chapter 10, Passion for Film. "Do you like watching old movies?" asked old John, standing at the bar, polishing glasses. Though they hadn't spent much time together, he was already familiar with Henry. Perhaps he had some secrets, perhaps he wasn't ordinary, but so what? Old John had a typical Western mindset. He was happy to pave the way for those who would come, but how they would proceed was up to them. Of course, a crucial prerequisite was that the person liked him, was receptive, had no high expectations, and knew how to live a down-to-earth life. This was the hard work and duty of their generation. In their eyes, Henry was just that kind of person. Therefore, communication between the two, and indeed the entire town, became simpler, less utilitarian. Consequently, old John would ask whatever he saw and whatever he wanted to ask. Lately, Henry preferred watching old movies to watching quasi-official free news channels like CNN. And he didn't just watch them once, even if it was a replay, he would watch it a second or third time, each time riveted with rapt attention. At old John's sudden question, Henry first glanced over, then his second, then turned his head away. Finally, as if suddenly realizing something, he snapped back to his senses, recovering from his immersion in the movie. Henry replied, "They're all so beautiful." For a man who had experienced the anime style of the 21st century and been dazzled by all sorts of de-slot goddesses, black and white films, a relic as ancient as dinosaur fossils, Henry had initially thought they would be out of place. After all, he'd seen clips online, including classic black and white Charlie Chaplin silent films, and the exaggerated body language had made him incredibly awkward. At first, it felt like nearly 20 years of no entertainment, especially the latter half, a painful, forced compromise. But with careful consideration, one could understand why classics are called classics. There's no need to dwell on cinematic techniques like camera work and lighting, every era has its own commendable aspects. A serious study would fill a PhD in film studies with lengthy dissertations. Henry wasn't that expert yet. What truly captivated Henry were the women who, even in black and white, could still be breathtakingly beautiful. After nearly 20 years of entertainment starvation, Henry was irrevocably addicted to black and white films. Of course, objectively speaking, there was nothing else to keep him hooked. He couldn't be addicted to billiards or darts, after all. With Henry's current physical condition, his only concern in competitive sports was how much to play with, not how to win. Kryptonian's abilities weren't simply about increasing strength or running speed, or simply improving them. They focused on the subtle control of each muscle, even varying the degree of change. It's similar to the way a normal person's biceps reacts to a normal arm being extended and then flexed to exert force. Only, the Kryptonian's adjustments were far more refined. On the face, they could effortlessly create what's known as facial expression, creating a wide range of exaggerated expressions. They could even, through subtle adjustments, create the illusion of a completely different person. In sports, this involved the manipulation and control of various forces. Combined with his own reaction speed and thinking ability, any world record in any sport was as fragile as a piece of paper before Henry. Take darts, for example. Shooting wherever you want is the most basic skill. Similarly, with billiards, hitting multiple holes in one shot and clearing the table with one shot became commonplace. After a few rounds, Henry stopped playing. It was boring, and he didn't want to expose his abilities. Old John understood Henry's point. He agreed, women of the golden age are truly not comparable to today's female stars. Not every flirtatious woman can be like Marilyn Monroe. Henry's tone was dismissive, though he didn't criticize her directly. He pointed at the woman on the TV screen and said, "That's a real man's dream, isn't it?" The TV was replaying Audrey Hepburn's Roman Holiday. The runaway princess was riding a scooter through the streets of Rome with malicious reporters. To put it nicely, her elegance blended with an innocent smile, captivating her every frown and smile. To put it bluntly, there's an air of foolish nobility about that smile, one can't help but want to protect it, or even destroy it. In this scene, all the efforts of the director and cinematographer seem meaningless. The insignificant male lead and the bystanders are like background material. Everyone's eyes are fixed on Audrey Hepburn's face, admiring her every expression. Unfortunately, Henry's opinion was not shared by the majority in the bar, and a group of older men booed them. Young people are young people, they only care about faces. Don't you know that those skinny ones will only knock you when you hug them? Marilyn Monroe is the best, however, there were also those who disagreed. You don't understand. Greta Garbo is the Venus who was born on Earth. Just seeing her can fill me with awe. What kind of goddess is a cold face? Hedy Lamarr is the symbol of lust. When I look at her, my thoughts burst out like a spring, uncontrollably. Henry listened to everyone talking about the goddess in their minds and couldn't help but sigh. Are your tastes so different? It's not that our hobbies are different, it's better to say that the real beauties are produced by Hollywood in the golden age. There are so many ugly people in the movies now, as if anyone with 2 eyes and 1 nose can be on camera. Yeah, there are too many choices, and no matter who you choose, it's not right. I think you're just arguing. You want to say something different about what others say. Anyway, we can only see them in movies, so why not talk about it? Of course, you can do whatever you want. Just go home and sleep early, and everything in your dreams will come true. Hey, tell me. With the rate Hollywood is declining, will someone with dark skin, a square face, thick eyebrows, a big mouth, and eyes that are more glaring than your wives be able to become the leading lady in the future? Even then, we still have to buy tickets to the theater, Henry said desperately in his heart. Old man, you're right. If you hold on a little longer, you will see such a future. Not only the film industry, but also television, games, and all visual media will be invaded. Don't you think it's exciting? Henry, holding his head, groaned and said, don't say it. I really don't want to see such a future. Everyone, including old William, laughed. Suddenly someone said, Henry, you are so interested in movies, why don't you go to Hollywood? The laughter stopped and the bar fell silent. I hope you will read, collect and recommend my new book. Thank you. Chapter 11 Next Steps. A major reason there were so few young people in the town was because the elders encouraged them to leave. Everyone knew that staying in the town offered no future, no future. It was a place for the elderly to retire, a place to rest, a place to be buried, not a place for the young. They didn't know where Henry came from or why. He could stay, no one would object. But he would eventually have to leave. Today's question, though seemingly casual, was also a test. This guy didn't seem to be here because of a broken heart, nor was he a wanted criminal or being hunted by gangsters. So, he shouldn't have stayed with them in this dying town. Since he had to leave, where to go would be a matter of debate for the old men. It was like the old ladies back home who loved to help people make matches. But Henry didn't respond. Instead, he jokingly said, how do I get there? Swim. Old John, standing behind the bar, suddenly said, if you need travel expenses, I have some money here. Henry turned to look at the old man with a serious expression. Perhaps the saying, if you show kindness without any reason, you're either a traitor or a thief, had left such a deep impression on him, that Henry initially retreated, wanting to refuse. But a person's eyes can convey so much. This man, who had experienced war himself and whose 2 children had died on the battlefield, truly wanted to help. At least his clear eyes dared to meet someone's gaze. Old John said again, don't think too much, this is just the payment for your work here. I just didn't give it to you before, come on. This is not a 5-star hotel, how high can the salary be? I dare say that if you really want to pay me, I may not be able to afford all the food I eat. My food is bad enough, if I reduce it again, I won't be able to survive. Old John said angrily, I am the owner of this bar, you don't have to worry about it. I have more savings than you think, and I can find a female college student to suck my big dick at any time. Save it to buy yourself a better coffin. Otherwise, you will let the wild dogs dig you out of the ground with great effort, but they can't even chew on the meat and bones. You are harming the dogs. Henry's neat counterattack made everyone follow suit, which made old John very angry. At this time, someone suddenly said, if you want money, why don't you go crabbing? It's this season. Yes, the ban will be lifted soon. I heard that many captains have started looking for crew members. I heard that someone wants to sell the crabbing boat. He has been trying for a year and hasn't sold it yet. Do you think it's possible? That guy just wants to find a captain, and he will be the owner himself, letting others take risks. Who is willing to really sell the boat that is no different from digging for gold? This is how bars in small towns are. You don't really need to take the initiative to find out any gossip. As long as someone starts it, people will automatically tell you all the bad news. This time, though, Henry was completely bewildered. He asked old John, what kind of crabs are you catching? Is there really money to be made from them? Old John looked rather dismissive, but another old man nearby quickly said, they're king crabs. You know king crabs? Spread out their legs, and they're huge, almost as tall as a man. King crab, Henry, A poor wretch in his previous life and still in this one, had never tasted one. But at least he'd seen pictures and knew what it was. If it was a king crab, then with its exorbitant price, it seemed plausible that those who caught it could make money. Old John said disdainfully, but crabbing is tiring and dangerous, but at least it's a legitimate job, not murder, arson, or bank robbery. And the money comes quickly. A capable captain, returning with a full load in a week or two, can make at least 300,000. And an experienced greenie can make 50,000 per trip, although it had only been a little over a month since he left the underground lab, and his job at the bar wasn't about keeping accounts. Henry could still gather a rough idea of the American purchasing power from everything he saw. It was indeed similar to his impressions from his previous life. A bottle of beer was 1 to 1,500, a large steak 5 to 10 for $5. Old John would serve up a whole basin of mashed potatoes and broccoli. Buying an average house in town wouldn't cost 10,000. Even building a bar like Old John's, including the interior and furniture, would cost 30 to 50,000. This was, of course, also due to the town's remote location, not exactly a desirable place. Housing and the prices of locally produced goods were quite cheap. If goods had to be shipped in, especially from outside Alaska, the prices would have skyrocketed. In other words, a single trip on the crabbing boat was enough to settle down in the town. The temptation was already great enough for Henry. However, he wasn't too eager to jump on the crabbing boat. Henry glanced at Old John, who had a sour face. He got along well with the old man because they both had steady personalities, willing to live a comfortable life. So, Henry wanted to hear Old John's opinion. The old man behind the bar seemed to have caught his questioning gaze, and said unhappily, "If you want to join the crabbing boat, I won't stop you. It's at least a job, but think about it. Crabbing is not only tiring and dangerous, but even death at sea is not uncommon. Every year, there are those unlucky souls who never make it back. I hope you at least understand what you're doing. King crab, which is caught for 2 months each year, is an important industry in Alaska. Although Alaskans don't have the saying if you haven't been on a crab boat, you're not a real man, nor are they the kind of people who know the risks and therefore reject the job. But they are really not that enthusiastic about this job. Even if the money comes quickly, you still have to be able to spend it. Unless they are desperate or need a large sum of money, most Alaskans will not choose to work on a crab boat. This has indirectly led to an increase in the labor shortage on crab boats and an increase in wages. The hope is to attract more outsiders to work. So Old John didn't pour cold water on Henry's enthusiastic attitude, nor did he encourage him to go on. Instead, he stated the truth in what he thought was a fair statement. Of course, Old John's cold attitude could not dampen Henry's interest. How could he, who had been both a social animal and a otaku in his previous life, not know the significance of money in modern society? As the saying goes, money isn't everything, but without it, you can do nothing. Even if you rob an entire town, you might not be able to find even 10,000 yuan in cash. So, is there a better way out than getting on a crab boat? I'm looking forward to reading, saving, and recommending this new book. Thanks. Chapter 12 Interview. While the nameless town did have a dock, it mostly served small freight ships. The dock where the crab boats departed was located south of the town, in another bustling, larger dock town. The two towns certainly weren't completely estranged. So when Henry wanted to board the crab boat, the town elders helped him contact a more experienced captain. Old John even drove Henry there himself. The passenger seat was occupied by the old man who had contacted the captain, known as the Pollock. Henry sat in the back of the truck, wrapped in his coat, leisurely basking in the October sun. Although October was considered autumn in lower latitudes, it was already bitterly cold in Alaska. Unable to squeeze into the cab, Henry had to sit in the back of the truck, but he was actually more than happy to get in the sun. Although he suspected he might be a Kryptonian, Henry didn't rush out to bask in the sun. It would be too conspicuous. Besides, his current strength was more than enough for daily life. Even if he sunbathed himself to the point of moving mountains and filing the sea, where would there be any mountains to move or seas to fill? The purple potato spirit snapped her fingers. That would be about 30 years from now. It was only 1990, so there was no need to worry about traveling so far. But Henry still enjoyed basking in the sun whenever he had the chance, like now. And according to Old John, it was this car he'd used to bring him back when he collapsed on the beach. He'd thrown him in the back of the truck, so it was like revisiting old memories. As for the small town to the south they'd mentioned being so close, Old John sped at 70 or 80 kilometers per hour, driving for over 3 hours before reaching their destination. This made Henry understand just how close Alaskans meant very close. It was something like the reflexes of a dinosaur, a way of understanding closeness. Alaska's crabbing season runs from October to November, when king crabs are at their plumpest. Every year, hundreds of crabbing boats depart from various regions of Alaska to catch king crab in the Bering Sea in early winter. A delicacy enjoyed on the table, king crab is worth nearly $500 million during the 2-month fishing season. This industry is not only a pillar of Alaska's economy, but also connects many businesses and communities, especially the crab fishermen. Many earn just these 2 months' worth, allowing them to enjoy a comfortable life the remaining 10 months. However, due to the harsh and dangerous working conditions, fishermen and fishing boats often fail to return. Captains and owners constantly recruit, ensuring a shortage of staff. Despite this, even some boats, captained by experienced captains, are not open to just anyone. Those who make a living here know who has the best skills and who, besides bluffing outsiders, can only hire locals by offering higher salaries. No captain would dare take advantage of the situation and take on a boat full of inexperienced crabbers. Unless they intend to never return, they're planning to defraud insurance. If an insurance company discovers this situation, they typically refuse to pay. Furthermore, boats with too many newbies aren't as efficient as those with more experienced crews. To avoid the temptation of making too much money and not having enough to live on, most people choose crab boats with experienced crews and reliable captains. Old John and his crew helped Henry find just such a boat. The Annie 21 is owned by its captain, George Jefferson III. To those unfamiliar, you might think it's 2 U.S. presidents rolled into one. Old George is a traditional crabber, having inherited his father's and grandfather's boats and business, having been on the front lines of the industry since childhood. Not only is he experienced, he's also a skilled leader. If a child wants to pursue this career, they can join Old George for a trip. With the captain's approval, a rookie can quickly become a seasoned veteran, welcomed aboard any boat. If a child wants to make a quick buck, even just for a couple of trips, they'll definitely want to join Old George's boat. At least returning safely and unharmed is a sure thing. But don't assume anyone can join Old George's boat. Unlike other boats facing recruitment difficulties, where anyone with a hand can get a job, Old George's boat is so popular that he, as the captain, can be very selective. So, Old John and the others brought Henry here before the crabbing season even started, so that Old George could interview him. If that didn't work out, they would look for another captain's boat. Because crabbing season was approaching, many of the crabbing boats at the dock were busy, repairing and maintaining their boats or restocking supplies for the sea. Old George stayed on his boat, personally inspecting every piece of equipment with his crew. The Polish man who brought Old John and Henry here was once a member of the Annie 21, having worked as a crabber for a while. So, upon seeing the boat, he skillfully stepped onto the deck and found Old George, who was inspecting the boat in the cabin. "Hey, old man, I told you to bring a young man with you. You didn't forget. Let me see, you Pole." Old George, after exiting the cabin and wiping the grease from his hands, embraced the newcomer, appearing quite friendly. The shirtless old captain was a very muscular man. While not as muscular as those bodybuilders, he wasn't the kind with baggy fat or a beer belly either. His hair and facial stubble were both white, clearly indicating that the old captain was of advanced age, not a young man. Seeing Old John approaching, he stepped forward to shake his hand and greet him. "Hey, old man, there's no bar on my boat. You'd better go back and wait for me to come over for a drink, then you'll have the chance to make some money. Otherwise, no chance. The Pole didn't tell me you were blind and couldn't see the living people next to me. Or maybe you can't see anything else besides crabs. Then I'll have to visit your wife tonight. Haha, old man, your mouth still stinks. There's a reason your bar is fast. It was in the same state 30 years ago, and it will be the same in 30 years, Old John retorted. Old George raised his hands and stepped back in surrender, only then to notice the only young man present. "Little Green, what's your name?" "Henry, sir." "Henry what? Only Henry? I haven't figured out what my last name is yet." "Huh." Old George laughed, not pressing the details. He circled Henry and patted him on the shoulder. As expected, Henry didn't move. It felt like he had been slapped on a rock. "Not bad, Little Green," Old George praised. Then he said to the two elders, "I agree to let him come on board." He then said to Henry, But crabbing is hard work, so you'd better be prepared. Once the boat leaves port, there will be no regrets. Old John, however, said, I have to warn you, too. This kid is a big eater. Don't let it get to the point where you have him cook crabs for himself on the boat. As long as you don't get seasick and throw up after eating, I guarantee you'll be able to hold on for 24 hours. Please read, bookmark, and recommend my new book. Thanks. Chapter 13 Zyulu's Life. On the crabbing boat, no one called Henry Henry. Everyone followed Old George and called him Little Green. Originally, it meant Green Crew, meaning new crew member. Henry remembered the term, which means rookie in Chinese. As the saying goes in the military, veterans have instructions, middlings have to wait, and rookies have to be patient. No matter where you are, rookies have no rights. It's like a truism. On the Annie 21, Henry was indeed the only one without crabbing experience. The others, even the least experienced, had sailed with Old George a few times, this being their second year. Henry had some sense of belonging, and he knew his place. Besides, he was completely new, completely clueless. Of course, he couldn't rely on his superpowers to beat everyone into submission. If you want to live comfortably, go home. However, under Old George's leadership, there was no deliberate bullying of the newbies. From the first day out at sea, until the crabbing grounds in the Bering Sea, there was only peace. Life after that was a relentless, horrific grind. A crab boat works nearly 21 hours a day. This doesn't mean there's only 3 full hours of sleep. Rather, these 3 hours are spread out throughout the day, resulting in only a little over an hour of uninterrupted sleep. Work is divided into 2 to 3 hour shifts, with a 5 to 10 minute break between each shift. This time is used for eating, drinking, and defecating. Therefore, crabbers eat 5 to 6 meals a day. Lunch and evening breaks are longer, lasting 20 to 30 minutes. These are the only times during the day when they have the chance to eat hot food. The rest of the break time is simple dry food. The work is complex and dangerous. The crew hangs a bag of ground meat bait in the center of a 350-kilogram iron crab pot and lowers it approximately 150 meters below sea level to attract crabs to feed. But once the pot is lowered, everyone can rest. A boat wouldn't have just one crab pot. The operation is continuous, and as soon as one pot is dropped, the previous one must be pulled up. Regardless of whether or not there were king crabs inside, the crabs had to be reorganized and new bait bags added. A key issue during this organization was ice. Unlike seawater poured onto the boat, solid ice wouldn't flow back out to sea through the side openings. Some would even freeze on the crab pots. If excessive ice isn't promptly dealt with, that is, broken up with hammers and thrown back into the sea, it could affect the boat's center of gravity and cause it to capsize. Therefore, even if all the crab pots were temporarily out at sea and not hoisted back aboard, everyone was still busy breaking the ice, leaving no time for rest. Of course, the boat's crane was needed to lower and raise the crab pots. Henry, the green kid, couldn't reach the crane, so he mostly followed the experienced crabmen around the crab pots. And don't assume king crabs are docile creatures. Even when scooped up at the surface, they're not as mobile as those at the bottom. Their hard shells, sharp spines, and claws are still very strong. Even without getting poked or pinched, simply picking up a king crab can injure your hands. So gloves are essential. Of course, Henry wouldn't injure his hands with a mere king crab. But he didn't make an exception and work barehanded to show his invulnerability. Besides the relentless hours and the unfriendly crabs, the biggest challenge on the crab boats is the ocean conditions. October and November in the Bering Sea are undeniably wintry. Arctic storms sweep in from the Arctic, mixing with the seawater, force the crews on the crab boats to work in temperatures around freezing. Sometimes, there's even a light snowfall. Winds often exceed 26 kilometers per hour, whipping up waves up to 10 meters high. Crabbing boats are small, so stability is naturally a challenge. Simply keeping steady in such conditions is a challenge. Not to mention the huge waves that frequently hit the boats, sweeping unwary crew members overboard. Fortunately, crab boats aren't warships, so if someone falls overboard, rescue efforts are still underway. But in such harsh sea conditions, the difficulty of rescue is unimaginable. Arguably, the first and biggest hurdle for getting on a crabbing boat is avoiding seasickness. Or rather, avoiding it as much as possible. If you get seasick, you'll just throw up and forget about working. These inclement seas, Horrific working hours, and the difficult king crabs are the reasons why Alaska's crabbing boats are always short-staffed. Henry initially wondered if it would be better to take a break from the daily grind and get more rest. But after experiencing the working conditions, he knew the answer without even asking. Ice breaking is constant, and the seas are so bad. Getting a good night's sleep on a boat like this would require a nap on a roller coaster. So, everyone on the crabbing boat would undoubtedly agree, fill the boat quickly and return to port quickly. Only those with nothing better to do would protest about lack of sleep. Get it done quickly, get home quickly. In times like these, an experienced captain is crucial. Besides steering the boat through the waves and avoiding capsizing, it also requires precise judgment of where to catch king crab. King crab migration patterns are unpredictable and don't show up on fishing radar or sonar, so the success of the catch depends heavily on the captain's experience, intuition, and luck. Unlucky times extend the time at sea, increasing the risk. A capable captain can return with a full cargo hold in about 5 days. The Pole had previously told Henry that a trip would take about 2 weeks, a feat only a mediocre captain could achieve. Most wouldn't last 2 weeks. After a week or so, even if the cargo hold isn't full, they'd opt to return to port for rest and recuperation. After all, this intense operation is a life-threatening endeavor, fueled by adrenaline. Overdoing it could lead to sudden death on board, and the entire ship's loss, a disastrous outcome. And in those few short days, Henry's performance was met with overwhelming satisfaction by the veterans. In a high-intensity work environment like this, the biggest fear is encountering incompetent teammates, and there's no time for workplace bullying. Henry's rookie status persists, as there's so much he doesn't know, and he's insatiable in asking questions. But once he's asked once he's tried something, he rarely makes a mistake again. I say almost because working with others inevitably leads to lapses in synergy. But no one complains, as Henry quickly corrects any issues with a simple shout. Who wouldn't be happy with such a reliable crew? A little green like him earns the lowest pay of all. It's hard to be envious. His rapid learning and efficient workmanship allow him to do more than just the basics. It's safe to say, with the exception of the rudder, Henry has touched every tool on the crab boat, inside and out. And no one complains. And all this time, in less than 5 days. Please read, bookmark, and recommend this new book. Thanks. Chapter 14 Accident. Complex sea conditions are the primary cause of accidents on crabbing boats. Even if everyone is extremely alert and vigilant, a small wave can still cause an accident. Even with an experienced captain like Old George at the helm, who can handle large waves and manage small ones, accidents can sometimes strike suddenly, catching everyone off guard. In such moments, everyone must look out for each other and be ready to support their fellow boat members. Western customs at sea have never been about minding your own business and not worrying about others' troubles. Rather, the ocean is vast, and everyone is there for each other. If we don't help each other, who else can help us? Therefore, mutual support and teamwork are crucial. Henry, working in this environment, although he tried hard to hide his super strength and various other abilities, was inevitably influenced by the work atmosphere and offered assistance to others in need. In such a busy environment, few noticed whether Henry's strength and speed exceeded the normal human limit. After all, as long as he didn't overdo it, he could still get through it. The closest he ever came to revealing his superpowers was when a wave hit the side, giving the Annie 21 a gentle lurch. At the time, everyone was hoisting the crab pots. The one that emerged from the water was completely full, and everyone was excited. The captain had found the crab congregation spot, and several pots had been full, and everyone was delighted. The sooner the hold was full, the sooner they could return to port and collect their pay. Just as the crab pots were towering over the side of the ship, a young crew member, who had only just escaped the nickname Little Green this year, was pulling the tow rope that moved the crab pots sideways, preparing to bring the fully loaded pots back to the deck, was suddenly jolted. The sudden jerk shifted the pot's center of gravity, breaking one of the supporting ropes. Not only did the pot return to the surface, it also threatened to swing outward. Meanwhile, the young crew member had unfortunate luck. His arm had somehow become entangled in the tow rope. The pot was swung outward, and he was either thrown overboard or his arm torn off. At this critical moment, Henry grabbed the swaying crab pot and planted his feet on the side, feigning a struggle to hold on. The young man's screams naturally caught everyone's attention, and everyone rushed to his aid. Although the young man's hands weren't torn off or thrown overboard, he was pulled to the deck by the ropes. Someone quickly untied his arms and pulled him aside. Seeing that the young man was being cared for, the other veterans faced a choice: abandon this crab pot or try to save it. Giving up meant cutting the ropes and letting the crab pot fall into the sea. Saving it depended on Henry's ability to hold on. Just as they were about to cut the ropes and tell Henry to let go, the Kryptonian pretending to work didn't think twice. Through gritted teeth, he said, "Can you reconnect a broken rope, little green?" "Hold on." The veterans immediately launched a rescue operation. Someone quickly slung a spare rope onto the crane, while another man stepped onto the side, two men behind him holding their feet as they prepared to reconnect a broken rope. Nodding was almost instinctive for these veterans. In a matter of seconds, they had reconnected the broken rope with just the right length. He called out, "Henry, let go." The Kryptonian, not wanting to be too conspicuous, obediently let go. The reconnected rope instantly taut, and the crab pot was finally securely held, though slightly tilted. Several men, tugging on the tow rope, pulled the crab pot onto the deck and lowered it by the crane. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief when the crab pot landed securely. Henry continued to feign arm pain and exhaustion, leaning against the side, panting. As for his hand, he was wearing a glove. If he didn't reveal it, no one else would be able to tell. Meanwhile, the young man whose arm was tangled in the rope sat by the cabin, still in shock. Having been tangled and pulled a bit, he was still injured. Although his arm could still bend and move, the strained muscles told him what had just happened was real. Several veterans went to comfort the two men, while others checked the newly hoisted crab pot. Even old George, the helmsman, came out. He had seen everything that had just happened, but before he could intervene, the situation was resolved by the crew on deck. Old George checked on the two men. He first checked on the frightened young man, making sure he was not seriously injured, then came to Henry. Henry's condition had already been checked by the veterans, so old George came over without further questioning. He simply patted Henry on the shoulder and said, "Well done. If it weren't for you, that guy would have survived, but his arm would have been gone." No one asked how Henry had managed to hold on to the corner of the crab pot. After all, it was only one of the 4 ropes that had broken, temporarily losing balance. Henry wasn't holding the entire weight of the crab pot, including the catch, on his own. Even if someone else had stood nearby, they could have held it up as well with a sudden burst of energy. In a crabbing boat's perilous working environment, miracles aren't common, but they do happen. Old George and the other veterans had experienced similar escapes before, so they didn't dwell on it. After making sure everyone was alright, old George ordered, "Replace the broken line with a new one. Everyone, keep working hard. Once we've caught all the king crabs at this spot, we'll be back in port. As for you two guys, I'll give you 10 minutes to rest, okay?" Before the two men in question could reply, an experienced crew member asked, "Captain, are you heading back so early? The hold is already about 80% full of king crabs. We just caught a few cages, and once we're all packed up, I think we'll have enough. Go home early, and everyone, get some rest. You won't be shortchanged, okay? You're the boss, you decide." Henry clapped his hands and said, "I'm fine. No need to rest, that's fine." The other man remained silent, apparently still recovering from the shock. Old George didn't let Henry go on, but said to the boy who had just rescued someone, "I told you to rest for 10 minutes, that's 10 minutes. Go into the cabin and get some whiskey, one for yourself and one for that boy. He's scared to death." "Okay, boss." Henry didn't argue and went into the cabin. The other veterans didn't say anything about the two rookies getting extra rest time, but continued their crabbing. If you want to return to the port early, it depends on everyone's efforts. There's really no time for intrigue. I'm looking forward to reading, collecting, and recommending my new book. Thank you. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 15 Harvest. The young man who took the whiskey tumbler with trembling hands was a mutant whose appearance differed from that of a normal person. He had shark-like gills on his face, allowing him to breathe underwater. His ability could be very useful for tracking king crabs. However, this mutant ability was not without its drawbacks. First, he faced the same problem of hypothermia that ordinary people experience in the Bering Sea. While it was fine underwater, He could suffer serious consequences if he didn't dry himself quickly upon surfacing. Furthermore, once at sea, getting on board the ship in the treacherous seas would take considerable time. These difficulties limited his actual effectiveness. Therefore, during the actual voyage, everyone relied on Captain Old George's experience to track the king crabs. He would only be deployed if there had been a long period of inconclusive search. In the past 5 days, this young mutant had only been out at sea twice. Perhaps due to his mutant ability, his physique and strength were even weaker than those of the average Caucasian. Therefore, this young mutant sat in a rather awkward position among the crab fishermen, somewhere between useful and ineffective. As for whether there's discrimination against mutants on the crabbing boats, Old George had said that, given the current labor shortage, anyone with a hand is welcome, regardless of mutant status. Just don't eat everyone else on the boat when you're hungry. Otherwise, they really don't care. As the saying goes, when everyone's on the boat, discrimination isn't that common. Unless someone gets on the boat and acts recklessly, then if they were accidentally thrown overboard by a strong wave, they can only blame their bad luck. A frightening accident left the young mutant clutching his whiskey tumbler for over 20 minutes before he recovered and rejoined the crabbing operation. No one blamed him for taking the extra rest. After all, he'd just barely escaped death. Anyone else wouldn't have been able to recover so quickly. Henry, on the other hand, drank a glass of whiskey and got back to work. After 5 days of intense work, everyone had developed a certain level of coordination. Sometimes, they didn't even need to be called out, just a glance was enough to get them on track. The efficiency of this crabbing trip was largely due to the extraordinary role played by this little green, though insignificant at the time. In retrospect, everyone felt he had coordinated perfectly. This saved enormous time and improved efficiency. So, on the morning of the 6th day, the N-21 returned to port smoothly. The last catch of king crab hadn't been completed, as the hold was full, and they couldn't return even if they didn't want to. There were designated berths for unloading. After the king crab season began, fishing companies maintained personnel at the docks 24 hours a day, waiting to purchase the crabs. Larger fishing ports would have dedicated markets and auctions, just like bluefin tuna, with daily auctions. But in smaller places like theirs, bidding was usually done directly on the docks. The crew's work didn't stop after arriving at port. They had to unload the king crabs from the hold, crate them, and weigh them. During this time, Old George would negotiate prices with a few fishing companies that were accustomed to cooperating. Often, they could gauge the quality and price by looking at the first few baskets of king crab. Then, the entire boat was purchased, leaving the winning fishing company to remain at the dock awaiting the final weighing results. As soon as the results were known, the fishing company would immediately issue a check and hand it to the boat owner or captain. Then, after all operations were completed and the crab boat was brought to its rest berth, it was time for the crew to receive their wages. Most crew members received a fixed salary agreed upon before joining the boat, while a few veterans received a percentage of the catch. If the captain and owner were different, the captain would also receive a minimum or a percentage. This was undoubtedly intended to motivate the veterans. After all, a boat's success often hinged on its performance. Henry, the newest and most inexperienced, was naturally the last to receive his check. The satisfied smiles on the faces of those in front of him showed that Old George was no stingy boss. Even the young mutant flicked his check with his fingers, shouting that he'd buy everyone a drink at the bar. When Henry received the check, he was startled by the number on it. He asked, "Boss, did you write the wrong number?" Old George knew what he had written, and said, "Boy, this is what you deserve. I've seen the broken end of the rope. It's the effect of aging. I should have discovered this problem when I checked the equipment beforehand, so, not only did you help me clean up a mess, but you also helped that kid save an arm. The extra money I give you is less than the amount the insurance company will ask me for after I messed up. So just take it with confidence." "What? I have a chance to get the insurance money," the young mutant said excitedly. Then he was slapped in the face by an old bird next to him, who asked, "Do you want the insurance money or the arm?" Knowing what he had to give in exchange, the young mutant held his injured arm with one hand and said hesitantly, "My hand is healed." "My hand is fine." Henry shook the check in his hand with peace of mind and said, "Thanks, boss." Although no one said how much they had taken, Henry still used his superpowers to know the number on everyone's check. Speaking of which, he was still at the lowest level and took the same amount as the young mutant. But as a little green, Taking such a number was considered excessive. So there was nothing to be disgusted with. With money in their pockets, a group of men naturally discussed where to go to have fun. Several people who had families in town planned to sleep with him for 3 days and 3 nights after returning home. Old George would go crazy before leaving to avoid regrets when he really couldn't come back. But now that he had returned to the port safely and got the money, he just wanted to go home, so he didn't hang out with those young people. But he saw that Henry didn't leave, as if he was waiting for him, and old George remembered the situation of this kid. He stepped forward and said, "You don't have a car. Come with me, I'll find someone to take you back to old John's bar. If you want to cash a check, I can also take you to the bank, boss. I just wonder if there is another chance to get on the ship? I want to make money." Although crabbing is considered a dangerous and arduous job by old John and others, it's nothing to Henry. Take the exhausting, non-stop work, for example. As long as he can get some sun, Henry feels like he has endless energy. That little bit of fatigue is nothing. He knows the significance of money in modern society. The money earned from working on a crab boat is legal, so there's no reason not to earn more when the opportunity arises. Please read, bookmark, and recommend my new book. Thanks. Chapter 16 Fixing Vulnerabilities. Old George wasn't surprised by Henry's idea. While many newbies might only take one trip aboard, others could adapt to the work and become full-time crabbers. Even if they didn't consider it a lifelong career, earning a few more trips while they were still young made sense. Old George then discussed his future plans, saying, "When I return, my wife will arrange for another crew. The N-21 will rest in port for a day, restock supplies, and undergo repairs before setting off again. I'm not sure how many days it will take them to return. If you're still interested in joining my boat, be conservative and come back to me in a week. The salary will be the same as this time, and I won't treat you like a green hand anymore. If you feel rested enough and want to join a boat sooner, you can have the Polish guy contact me. I'll help you find a reliable boat. But for now, your priority is to rest up. Come back for at least 3 days before thinking about this, okay, kid?" Henry certainly wouldn't say he was okay and could continue aboard. Even if he dared, no captain would dare take someone like him, fresh off a boat, out to sea. He nodded in agreement, of course. But old George warned, rest well, rest well. No scumbags are welcome on my ship. Addicts are a nuisance aboard, and aside from cooling off in the Bering Sea, I can't offer any other assistance. Do you understand?" Raising his hands in surrender, Henry said, "Understood, boss. I'll do as you say." As a Kryptonian who couldn't feel a thing about whiskey, Henry doubted the powder would work on his body. But he wasn't interested in trying it either. Seeing the young man's serious expression, old George knew he'd taken him in. Patting him on the shoulder with relief, he said, "Deposit your check in the bank as soon as possible. I've seen too many people get drunk in bars and have their checks soaked and ruined, or have them stolen. And you have to hope the thief isn't quick enough, or there's nothing I can do." "A bank?" Henry asked, rubbing the check pocket. "Is there a place to get cash?" "Cash? You don't even have a bank account, do you?" Old George sighed. Although he didn't ask about the young man's background in detail, his extensive experience gave him a rough idea of what was going on. Old George said, "I'll find someone to help you. That old guy is very good at handling these things, and you can ask him if you have any questions. I'll take you back to old John's bar afterwards. If you need advice, the person I introduced you to won't offer anything too outrageous. My legs are like they were floating, and I can't help you with all this stuff. Is that okay?" "You'll be a big help, boss." Henry certainly agreed. Having someone to help you out is always better than navigating things on your own. Patting Henry on the shoulder again, old George said, "If all is well, come with me to the dock management office. I'll make a call there, and you wait there, okay?" "As you wish." The dock management office was just a small office, but there were tables and chairs nearby for people to relax. Old George dialed a number from a pay phone, explained the situation to the person on the line, and hung up. Before leaving, he bought Henry a cup of coffee and said, "The old guy will be here in about 10 minutes. His name is Tom. I've told him about your appearance and situation. You two can handle the rest of the situation yourselves." "Okay." Henry accepted the coffee and nodded. "Thanks, boss. Finish it quickly, get some rest. It's hard to recover after a boat trip without 3 days of rest. The older you get, the longer it takes. I can't afford to hang out in bars like you young people." With that sarcastic remark, old George was gone. He still had to get to the parking lot to drive home, and if he didn't, he'd be dead. The coffee sold at the dock was terrible, and Henry nearly spit it out after his first sip. But perhaps that was precisely why it was so refreshing. Especially with his enhanced sense of taste, he felt so alert that he felt like he could soar straight out of the atmosphere. A moment later, someone drove up in a light brown vintage car that Henry had only seen in TV shows and old movies. Instead of parking in the parking lot, they rolled down the passenger window near the rest area. The person inside yelled, "Hey, kid, I'm talking to you. Get in the car. That damn guy George asked me to come here." "Tom?" Henry asked doubtfully as he stood up. "Yes, that's me. Where else can you find a Tom as handsome as me?" The person in the car was an old white man with a very unique personality. His hair was half brown and half silver, and he wore a pair of sunglasses that were very inappropriate for his time. Henry was not afraid that the other party had any bad intentions. He opened the passenger door and got in. But before he sat down, Tom said with disgust, "Wow, you are pickling yourself like a pickle. The smell on you is only slightly worse than canned herrings. Is it really that bad?" Henry smelled the smell on his body and explained, "You know, on the boat, we either wear raincoats or coats. It's hard not to smell pickled. God, please spare me." Tom rolled down the window of the driver's seat regardless of how cold it was outside. He said, "Come to my site and take a shower. Is it necessary? George said that you might need to get some documents. You can't take pictures with your current disheveled look." Looking at himself in the rearview mirror, Henry now had messy hair that was almost covering his eyes, and a face full of stubble. If he used it directly for an ID photo, it would be like telling others that there was something wrong with me. So Henry didn't insist and said, "Okay, I should tidy up. But I don't have any clean clothes. If you don't mind wearing old clothes, I have clean ones to change into. If you want to buy new clothes, we can go around to the store first." "No, as long as I have something to wear." "Okay, let's go." Tom stepped on the accelerator and the car sped away. While driving, Tom continued, "Go to my place to tidy yourself up and take a picture, and then I'll take you to the bank to withdraw money. Do you have any questions? Can you get documents here?" "Anything?" Tom replied, "My main job is as a human resources agent. I help people from other places get work permits, then introduce them to crab boat captains, and then I take a reasonable commission. Everything is legal. Your situation is rather special. If you don't want to be targeted by the IRS, you still have to submit relevant documents such as work permits and pay the taxes you should pay afterwards. Everything I do is legal, so don't mistake me for a fake document maker. I will naturally complete what George asked me to do, but I will still charge you a fee. I think that's understandable. I'm looking forward to reading, collecting, and recommending my new book. Thank you." Chapter 17 Shaving Problems. "Is this even possible?" Henry asked in surprise. Though he didn't know the details, he knew one thing: he had no legal status. He'd be dazed to find any documents, even fake ones. Now that Tom claimed he could, it was no surprise. Old Tom smirked. "This is Alaska. As long as you're not a federal criminal, everything's easy." He paused, then whispered stealthily, "Even if you are, there's still a way to deal with it." "You're not, are you?" Henry quickly shook his head. "Of course not." "That's good," Tom said, regaining his composure. They turned a corner and stopped in front of an office with large floor-to-ceiling windows. A sign read Old Tom Human Resources Agency and Consulting. Inside, a middle-aged woman was working on paperwork. Tom led Henry inside, but the woman inside didn't even glance up, not even glancing at them. Her demeanor, that of a seasoned, old-fashioned clerk, was evident. There were a few odd gold coins scattered on the table. At old George's signal, the woman slowly swept them into a drawer. As Henry passed by, he was unsurprisingly greeted with a wave of disgust. "Wow, what ditch did you pick up?" the woman said. "One of old George's crewmen, fresh off the ship." "Oh, okay." Clearly, the woman knew old George and understood the fresh off the ship implication. It might smell a bit, but he had money in his pocket. So he had to put up with it. Don't think white people are superior, that they won't bow down to a few dollars. Fortunately, the woman didn't suddenly change her attitude and fawn over him, or else Henry would have been mortified. He was afraid his long-held iron fist would unleash its full force. While this kind of tailor-made attitude wasn't uncommon in Henry's previous life, it was nothing new. "I wasn't angry." His attitude was at most impolite, not something close to my face or even physical. Besides, It was a fact that I was a mess. Was I not allowed to say anything? Incidentally, this body wasn't actually sweating right now, it was just radiating normal body heat. So the smell was actually a combination of seawater and the various strange juices of the king crab, evaporating from my body heat and rapidly cooling from the outside world. The salt in the seawater was especially noticeable. It made everything smell strange. I took the clean clothes from Tom and used the bathroom in his office. Passing by the large bed, I couldn't help but wonder if he was hoping to molest the secretary or some female customer. But judging by the shabby place, it probably wouldn't be used much. Showering wasn't much to say, I just scrubbed vigorously. It wouldn't hurt, so I had to get rid of all the dirt. Think of it as a thorough cleaning. Dirt that didn't belong on the body was easy to deal with, but hair and beard were a challenge. Henry tried to cut a section with scissors, but when he realized he couldn't get any further, he decided not to force it. He was afraid that forcing it would only break the scissors. So what should he do with his face? He remembered seeing in a Superman cartoon that Superman used thermal vision and mirror reflections to adjust his appearance. So could he shoot light with his eyes? Henry had never tried that. To avoid damaging someone else's bathroom, Henry raised his palm in front of him, intending to use himself as a target. But how did he shoot thermal vision? There were no online tutorials. He held it in for a few breaths like a bowel movement, his eyes wide open. As expected, nothing happened. Then he silently told himself to shoot thermal vision, but it didn't work either. So Henry had to resort to his distant memories. There are many depictions of Superman's origins, but the most detailed one is probably the long-running TV series Smallville. Clark Kent, a Kryptonian boy slowly awakening his superpowers, flashes his heat vision for the first time. It's due to sexual arousal. Seeing his fair-skinned, long-legged teacher, while any normal boy would only experience a lustful dream in a nosebleed, our future Superman's eyes lit up, nearly burning down his family's barn. So, what's this hinting at? Is he searching for his own belated adolescence? Or perhaps reminiscing about the adolescence he'd experienced before time travel, over 30 years after his departure? Henry, desperate to get a haircut and shave, has no choice but to take a desperate gamble. Closing his eyes, the images of the teachers in his D-slot seem to flash before his eyes. Thanks to his supermind, he remembers every movie he's seen so vividly that he can even recite the movie numbers. As expected, the first reaction is felt in his lower body. Then, a surge of heat surges from his tailbone, up through his spine, neck, and back of his head. This change reminds Henry of the prelude to the new Hollywood Godzilla, the nuclear blast. Could it be that he's not actually a Kryptonian, but a humanoid Godzilla? Suddenly, a final impulse, presage time, surged into his eyeballs. Henry opened his eyes uncontrollably, only to see a searing red before him. Then, a burning pain washed over his right hand. The sensation came and went quickly, like a man's orgasm. The world returned to normal color. His right hand, held before him as a target, hadn't been pierced by the bullet, only 2 burn marks on the palm. Henry had secretly tried it himself, touching the boiling water he'd used to make coffee with his own hands. It was nothing. It just felt incredibly hot, not painful at all, let alone bruised. This pain was the first he'd felt since leaving the underground laboratory. But it was like breaking through a membrane, freeing him from some kind of restriction. He could fire a heat beam at any time he wanted, adjusting its intensity and duration. It was like installing a switch and valve in his brain for the heat beam, though the details of controlling it still required some practice. Well, after dealing with this Kryptonian's unique sexual instinct, the next problem is even more puzzling. How can you use a mirror to reflect your own heat rays, and make the intensity high enough to melt the hair secreted by yourself? It feels like you can just pick up a mirror and bounce back Godzilla's nuclear explosion rays. But Superman did such an incredible thing. So if someone says that everything about Superman is based on science, and therefore his magic resistance is weak, then let this guy explain how to use an ordinary mirror to bounce heat rays and shave the beard on the Man of Steel. Anyone who can find a reasonable physical explanation deserves a Nobel Prize. Please read, collect and recommend my new book. Thank you. Chapter 18 Bioforce Field. To avoid damaging someone else's property, Henry had no choice but to experiment with his own hands. After much effort, he finally found some clues. Ultimately, it was that Superman cheat, he didn't know how to rationally utilize the Bioforce field. While the yellow sun's rays could alter his constitution, The energy wasn't fully utilized for transformation. A significant portion was stored. This storage wasn't like the internal energy stored in the Danshin, as depicted in martial arts novels. Henry, with his highly developed senses and a keen understanding of his organs and body, could clearly sense that every time he basked in the sun, not only did his cells strengthen, but additional energy was also absorbed. This energy was ubiquitous, but was confined to the areas below the skin, including the hair produced by it. This was part of the secret to the Man of Steel's indestructibility. It wasn't simply the mutated, strengthened cells that could withstand all damage. With a proper use of this energy, almost anything could be achieved. The reason I say almost was because, in Henry's simple experiments, nothing was impossible. This includes allowing the heat rays to reflect back onto his body without damaging the mirror, burning only the exposed beard hair. However, doing so reduces the amount of energy stored in his body. For example, shaving reduces the amount by a factor of 1/1,000,000th of his current energy reserves. Henry almost calls this power, which grants him the power to make his wishes come true, magic. The reason it's called a bio-force field in Superman's setting is likely to emphasize that Superman originates from Krypton, a planet with technology far more advanced than Earth's, and therefore naturally lacks magic that's difficult to explain scientifically. Furthermore, his scientific upbringing and the discovery of his origins on a technologically advanced planet have made Superman feel less inclined to develop magical abilities. To test this idea, Henry attempted a basic trick, lighting a fire. He rubbed his index and thumb together, and effortlessly, a flame, like a lighter, appeared at his fingertips. This discovery briefly made Henry question his Kryptonian identity, but he also understood why Superman hadn't developed this ability. From a scientific perspective, energy conversion inevitably faces a problem, the generation of entropy. Simply put, waste. Using heat rays to burn off the stubble on my chin, cheeks, and neck only consumes 1/1,000,000th of my stored energy. But the simple act of lighting a fire with my fingers instantly depletes 1/10,000th of my energy reserves. And the longer I maintain the flame, the more energy I lose. Simply put, this seemingly magical performance is a highly inefficient energy conversion. Using super speed to create fire by drilling wood together, zero energy loss. It's unimaginable. If I wanted to emulate the Dark Lord Wizard from World War II in the next room and set Paris ablaze, I'd have to bundle several superhumans together as magical batteries to achieve such a feat. Of course, this conclusion is based on the fact that my solar cell has only been in use for a short time. Energy reserves are far from reaching their peak, let alone exceeding their red line. Furthermore, whether there are more efficient ways to convert energy through magic, such as through the proper use of rituals or props, is unknown. Or perhaps it could be a return to Marvel's original setting, where all magicians actually borrow magic from the dimensional demons. The only difference lies in who they borrow from and how they ultimately repay. In short, from all indications, I'm becoming more and more like a Kryptonian. At least in terms of my abilities, they're quite similar to the Superman I remember. All that's left is testing my super breathing and flight abilities, or perhaps I'm actually the descendant of a Kryptonian adventurer and a native of a certain planet, Adaxum. These aliens are very similar to Kryptonians, able to absorb yellow sunlight to strengthen themselves and aren't afraid of kryptonite. Instead, they're afraid of lead, a substance more common on Earth. So don't think you can act recklessly just because you have superpowers and a body of steel. If I were Adaxum, I wouldn't even need to search for alien minerals to deal with myself, I could just be riddled with lead bullets. Lead bullets are a form of conventional ammunition. The question is, what kind of person am I? Henry still hasn't decided. Henry didn't even know if he'd encountered anything containing lead in his daily life recently. He couldn't even determine what planet this alien self, who had traveled through time and space, had come from. He'd figured things out in the bathroom. Thanks to his super brain speed, it hadn't taken him long. It was just that the noise he'd made was quite loud. While he hadn't damaged anything in the bathroom, he was sure someone outside could hear something. His right hand, the target of his experiment, was in a terrible state, flesh and bone exposed. While it was clearly healing, it still wasn't as fast as the immortal level healing of Wolverine or Deadpool. To avoid alarming anyone, Henry tore a strip of cloth from an old shirt, washed it, and wrapped it around his palm. As for the pain, honestly, after the torture he'd endured in the later stages of his time at the research facility, even if he'd had nails hammered into his hands and feet like Jesus, the pain would have been nothing but a drizzle. After cleaning up, Henry left the bathroom, passed through the large room, and arrived at Tom's office. The owner of the office put both legs on his desk, crossed and raised, with an unhappy look on his face. When he saw Henry coming out, he wanted to say something. But when he saw the bandage wrapped around his right hand, his original words were blocked. After a moment, Tom gave him a sympathetic look and said soothingly, "Young man, I understand that you have a strong desire. If you need it, I can take you to the strip club in small town. With a little tricks and a little money to pave the way, you can find an ideal sweetheart to spend the night with. There is no need to torture your hands like this. You must have scratched the skin. Your hands are like this. Do you want me to take you to the pharmacy to buy some ointment? Or some lubricant or something?" Fuck. What did this guy understand? Instead of explaining the injury on his hand, inexplicably, Henry wanted to test the result of the heat ray explosion in the brain. Would it melt through like a laser, or boil the brain and then explode? There is a good head in front of him to test. New book, please read, collect, and recommend. Thank you. Chapter 19 Bank Payment. Old Tom, unaware of his escape, pulled Henry to a wide wall, snapped a few photos, and then safely escorted him to the bank. First National Bank of Alaska is the most common bank in Alaska and one of the best banks in the United States, consistently receiving a 5-star rating. Founded in 1922 by Winfield Irwin Sr., it laid a solid foundation during the railroad construction boom in Alaska in the 1920s. A bank like this naturally has a wide range of business options, and the bank manager knows how to entertain every type of guest. At least when Tom led the man in, the bank manager, who was sitting in his office, immediately came out to greet him. "Hi, Mr. Tom, you look as handsome as ever today." The bank manager extended his hand in greeting. But old Tom didn't give the visitor any face and said, "You might as well say that Franklin is still Franklin. It won't change even after 100 years. Right, haha, Franklin is as old as the history of this bank." "Of course it won't change," the bank manager joked to himself and asked, "Who is this guest?" "Henry, old George's crew member. He is here to cash a check. Welcome to our bank. Our bank has the best reputation and the most convenient service in the United States. I wonder if you want to deposit the money into an account in another bank or open a new account in our bank." Tom answered on behalf of Henry. "Cash. He wants to collect cash directly. If you cash, the handling fee will be 0.6%. The general handling fee is 0.4%. If you open an account in our bank, I can reduce the handling fee for cashing checks to 0.2. Don't you consider opening an account? He still has some incomplete documents. If you are flexible, it is not impossible to consider other options." Tom explained the situation tactfully, and turned to ask, "Henry, what are you going to do?" Some people would be concerned about the small difference in fees, so Tom didn't intend to help Henry make the decision. Of course, the reason he revealed the details was to let the bank manager know that there would be some difficulties involved, and he needed to be prepared. "No, I'll just take the cash," Henry said without hesitation. Understanding Tom's hint, the bank manager naturally didn't comment further on Henry's decision. After all, there were some risks in allowing him to conduct an illegal operation. Although doing so might allow him to receive a commission under the table, since the client had made the decision, it was better to save everyone the trouble and follow the rules, without any further worries. The bank manager, smiling unwaveringly, moved an elegant wooden tray towards Henry and said, "Please take out the check you want to cash. I'll process it for you right away." The swiftness of the action surprised Henry. He had expected banks to be hesitant or take some time to process such large amounts of cash. Seeing Henry's slightly surprised expression, Tom knew what these newbies were thinking without even asking. He explained, "During crabbing season, some crabbers often take the cash and never return. So, banks usually keep extra cash on hand during this time." Nothing surprising. This also explained why, despite being a small bank in this small town, Henry observed that there were quite a few armed security guards. Adhering to the principle of making money legitimately, there was no need to cause trouble, so robbing a bank was certainly not an option. Henry placed a check signed by old George on the tray. The bank manager took the tray away, looked at the number on the check, and confirmed, "Sir, you'd like to cash this check for 80,000 taels, is that correct?" "Yes." "Okay, wait a moment." He stood up with the tray, and the bank manager went to process the payment. At the same time, a long-legged woman in black stockings entered the office and politely asked, "Would you like coffee or tea, sir?" There was no third option. Henry lamented. He said, "Coffee, thank you." Tom didn't ask for anything and asked the bank lady to leave. Instead, he walked over to the manager's liquor cabinet and poured himself a glass of whiskey. He asked, "Boy, are you an adult?" "Well, what's the legal drinking age?" Henry asked. He wasn't sure if the rules in this world were the same as he remembered, so he asked. 21. That's a shame. I'll just have coffee. It's a shame there's no milk, Tisk. Your life would be half as fun then. Returning to the sofa with his whiskey glass and settling comfortably, Tom asked, "Tell me about it. How did you end up on George's ship? I didn't know you did background checks here. Who are you? An undercover CIA agent, huh? We'll have to wait a minute. Instead of chatting, do you want to meet me? Or admire this tasteless office? I can tell you responsibly that none of the paintings and furnishings here cost more than £100. Not intending to elaborate on the cheapness or taste of the office, Henry answered Tom's question. The Polak introduced me to the ship. We met at Old John's bar. You know that little town up north? That old, stubborn guy from World War II, huh? I know him. A whole family of patriots, and he's the only one left. Henry didn't intend to refute the slightly rude teasing. Old Tom asked again, "That's more than that, kid." Old George rarely pays attention to little Greenie. "What else did you do?" "Well, there was a little accident on the boat, and I helped to fix it. And then I thought I was a quick learner and a bit more diligent. As for the rest, you'll have to ask George. I don't know what he really thinks." "Oh, a little accident," Tom said casually, but didn't dwell on it. The two of them couldn't continue their small talk when the bank manager walked in. This time, he brought a larger tray with stacks of cash on it and placed it in front of Henry. "After deducting our bank's handling fee of 480 taels, there are a total of 79,520 taels. 100 tael bills are bundled in 100 note bundles, and there are 7 bundles here. I took the initiative to change the remaining amount for you. It's all here, please count it." At the same time, the bank lady who had brought in the coffee reappeared. This time, she wheeled in a bank-type money-counting machine and skillfully counted all the cash in front of Henry, adding up the figures on a calculator to confirm the accuracy. When the bank lady finished counting, Henry followed suit. He didn't plan to count again by hand, he just felt rather dazed, holding the bundles of bills. Seeing this, the bank manager had someone bring a small bag and put all the bills in it. He smiled and said, "This bag is free. Please read, bookmark, and recommend this new book. Thanks." Chapter 20 Consultation. Driving back to the office, the woman was still busy at her desk. Tom asked the customer to sit down first, then picked up an old backpack, emptied it, and handed it to Henry, saying, "Exchange your money for this backpack." "It's yours, why exchange it?" Henry asked, puzzled. "That bank always provides the same kind of bag when customers come to withdraw cash and don't have a bag to put it in. So anyone walking around with a bag like that is like saying, 'I'm rich, come and rob me.'" Henry frowned and asked, "Is the bank colluding with the outsiders?" Tom explained, "No, the bank isn't that shady. But no matter how they change it, they'll be targeted by those with ulterior motives. So only a little green kid, unaware of the situation, would run around with a bag like that." "You were brought in by George. I don't want you to get robbed the moment you leave my place. I'd be derelict in my duty then." Henry, understanding the situation, didn't bother changing bags. He simply stuffed the bank-provided bag into the backpack Tom had given him. The conspicuous handbag could just be clipped to the outside, so it didn't matter how the money was carried. Seeing that Henry was done, Tom tapped the table and said, "Now that I've helped you collect the money, let's talk business. My fee for helping you with the necessary documents and procedures is 2,000. 2,000. Henry's eyes widened in surprise. "That's cheaper than I thought. Aren't these real documents, not fake ones?" Tom smiled and said, "Believe me, real ones are cheaper than fake ones. The reason most people can't do it is that they don't know who to contact, and even those who do find out may not know what to do. The law opens many doors for those who understand it. As long as you follow the right path, there's no need to waste a lot of money. It's just that most people who know will tacitly keep it to themselves. Because they have no obligation to help others unconditionally, right? Some say that the methods of making money are all written in the criminal law. This is both right and wrong. Right because breaking the law is truly lucrative. The price you pay lies elsewhere, like after getting caught. Wrong because, in the eyes of high-level players, the profits aren't just troublesome, they're also small slivers. For example, Could an ordinary person rob a bank and steal 100 million yuan at once? And not have to be chased by the police afterwards? Henry wasn't exactly accustomed to such things, but he didn't think anything of it either. As the saying goes, let him be strong, and a gentle breeze sweep over the hills. As long as I lie flat enough, wind resistance will be low. This is physics, scientifically proven. Although he wasn't sure if Tom was as capable as he claimed, Henry still trusted George's recommendation. The old man wouldn't just assign someone with the intention of swindling his salary back, would he? So, without a second thought, Henry reached into his bag, pulled out a bundle of money, placed it on the table, and pushed it across. Tom picked up the bundle of banknotes with a bank seal and said half sarcastically, "Oh, kid, are you going to count the money myself? I have some questions. If you can help, that would be great." Henry pointed to the French window outside and said, "It's a consulting company, isn't it?" putting the bundle of bills down and pushing it back to the middle of the table. Tom looked at the young man in front of him with a calm demeanor. "Tell me. I may not be able to do everything. Is there a car rental company here? I want to rent a car." "Rent a car? There's none in town. You have to go to the area near Hooper Bay Airport to find a private rental company. Why don't you just buy a car? Those rental cars are for tourists, and the cost is not cheap," Henry said honestly. "I plan to try my luck in Hollywood after the crabbing season." "Oh, the dream of becoming a star?" "Not necessarily, maybe just to see the world. Anyway, I won't stay here for too long. Buying a car, I will have to sell it later, which is troublesome. It's the same to ask someone to take care of it," Tom said seriously. "If you are willing to listen to my opinion, then my advice to you is to buy a car. I don't know how many times you plan to go on the crabbing boat, but if you don't have a bank account, believe me, you don't want to carry that bag through airport security," pointing to the old backpack next to Henry. So the best option for you is to take the ferry. Another advantage of the ferry is that if you pay an extra fee, you can drive your car on and go to your destination with you. This way you save the time of looking for local transportation and avoid some unnecessary trouble." Henry frowned and asked, "Will there be trouble with airport security checks on domestic routes?" Tom shrugged helplessly and said, "You can never know how those who hold public power will use the power they are given. I only know that smart people will know how to stay away from trouble. Comparatively, the ferry is much simpler. You buy a ticket, drive on, when you reach your destination, drive off. That's it. Even if you have a whole carload of explosives, no one will care as long as you don't detonate it right away." Tom leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Of course, the ferry has a minor drawback. It takes longer. If you think that's a problem, I have no objection. I'm just offering a suggestion." "Okay, then buy me a car. Or tell me where I can find a used car." "What are your requirements for a car?" "4 wheels, and something that runs on gas." With a laugh, Tom untied the car keys from his keychain and tossed them to Henry. "The used car dealerships in town only sell junk," he said. "You should just drive this baby." Henry looked at the keys with disdain, then at old Tom. The old man said disapprovingly, "Hey, that's a Cadillac DeVille, a 1965 classic. Who wouldn't love this treasure? And besides, there's a benefit to driving it, up 25 years old." The car wasn't in the condition of a meticulously cared for vintage car, it was just reasonably clean. While his standards weren't high, it felt like a junk collector. Henry asked unsatisfiedly, "What's the benefit? Just look at the license plate, and the cops won't stop you. And even if they do, just tell them old Tom is still handling the paperwork and transfer, and no one will bother you, so the real value lies in the license plate." Henry silently accepted the car keys. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" Tom asked with satisfaction. He couldn't tell if he was happy about getting a new car or the fact that he'd made a lot of money from this deal. "Please read, bookmark, and recommend my new book. Thanks." Chapter 21 Return. Henry pushed the bundle of money in the middle back out. In response to Tom's question, Henry said bluntly, "It depends on what documents you think I need. If you can help me with them, then go ahead and get them. I'm sure I'll need a driver's license." It was the same problem. Henry wasn't familiar with this world. Even before crossing over, he wasn't familiar with this country across the ocean. So when he was undecided, he still had to consult the locals. This time, Tom accepted the bundle of money on the table with peace of mind. It was 10,000 taels of silver. Who wouldn't want it? He put the bills to his nose, sniffed them, and swiped them through his fingers a few times. Tom smiled with satisfaction and said, Okay. I'll put the documents with the car transfer documents next time you're in town. If it's urgent, give me at least 3 days, no rush. I won't be here for a week. But is the money enough? Yes, boss. Tom thought for a moment and said seriously, but now it's my turn to have a question, boss. Henry what? What? Henry was puzzled. Surname, your surname. You can't just have Henry on your ID, right? It gives people the impression there's something fishy going on without even checking. That was true. So the surname question was right there. What should he use? Kent? Wayne? Al? Captain? Nyono Odin, as the Russians had called him? Or should he just keep it simple and go with Owen? After careful consideration, Henry came up with an answer. Henry Brown? That was old John's surname. He was the first person to show him kindness after he'd traveled to this world. Borrowing his surname wouldn't be a problem, since he wasn't planning on becoming his godson. It wasn't some dignified, inherited name. Is that okay? Henry asked. Of course, boss. Even if you want to call him Charlie Brown and get a dog, I'm fine with that, Tom quipped. That's it. See you in a week. Henry picked up his backpack and prepared to leave. Tom wanted to see him off, but he just waved from his seat. But then, as if a thought struck him, he stood up, found an empty suitcase, and followed him out. What's wrong? Henry asked again. I'm cleaning up the junk in the car, and there are some personal belongings. Leaving them there would be an eyesore for you. Why don't you let me take them? Right, okay. Henry knew the truth that gifts are junk. He just needed a car, not all the weird stuff tucked away inside. Tom had actually taken away quite a bit of junk. There were cases of used and unused cases, Coke cans under the seat cushions, bottle caps, coins, and so on. What caught his eye was a short revolver in the passenger compartment. It was shiny and well-maintained, evidently well-maintained. As he took the revolver, Tom said, Alaska doesn't require a gun license. You just register your proof of purchase when you buy a gun. It makes it easier for the police to track you. So if you don't have a license, it's not that I won't help you, but you can't get one in Alaska. Of course, Henry didn't need the gun, so he took it. He didn't care about Tom's extra words. No, I don't need it, just a suggestion. If you're planning on traveling on the Alaskan roads, at least get yourself a shotgun. That way, if you encounter a bear, you'll have to fight it hand to hand. Henry paused as he was about to open the car door and get in, then turned and asked, Are there a lot of bears? You'll always encounter them when you're unlucky. But when you'll have bad luck, you never know, right? Considering he wasn't afraid of Earth's bears, asking just that was a question about bear paws and gallbladders. Henry waved, I understand, and got in the car. Just as Henry was about to drive away, Tom stopped the car again. He had someone roll down the window and hand him an atlas, saying, Although this map is old, Alaska hasn't changed much in decades. You'll definitely need it, thanks. He placed the map on the passenger seat, where it could be easily reached, and drove off. He had learned how to drive a manual transmission car before crossing over, but he didn't have the money to buy one. Though decades later, the necessary rust was noticeable, thanks to his super senses and super brain, driving wasn't a big deal. This perfectly run and vintage car set off smoothly. The sense of space required for driving was a given. With the road conditions in the US, or even Alaska, it's hard to find a car to crash into, let alone get stuck or hit. Before returning to Old John's bar, he drove to the town store to do some shopping. It was a general store owned by an elderly couple in town, selling everything from clothes to lawn mowers, from Coke to balloons. The selection wasn't large, but the variety was comprehensive. The couple were regulars at Old John's. Or rather, everyone in town was a regular at that one bar. The only person in town was the old lady tending the shop today, and upon seeing Henry enter, she greeted him warmly. Hey, young man, you're back. What about a full trip? The captain made a lot of money, so our pay wasn't bad either, Henry said bluntly. What he said wasn't wrong, nor was it overly modest. After all, everyone knew he was just a green hand, and there was no way he'd get the lion's share. But as long as he got back safely, he'd be better off than many others. The woman behind the counter said, Take whatever you need. I'll give you a 20% discount. Consider it a gift from me. Old John's been raving about you these days. Go back early after you finish shopping so he can see it. Got it? Henry grabbed a few sets of clothes and underwear, then some snacks. He went to the frozen section to pick up some more food. Henry felt guilty about always eating old John's food. He did want to bring back a gift, but old John wasn't a fan of purely mementos. There wasn't anything missing from the bar or that needed replacing. Don't assume that an elderly man living alone is slovenly or struggling. His hands-on skills meant he wouldn't have broken, barely usable items or surplus items he couldn't use. Henry, who also lived alone, knew very well that if such a person received a gift that was not to his liking from an outsider, he would only feel that the other person was annoying him and taking up his space. As for what kind of gift is considered to be just right, in fact, even if you ask the person himself, there may not be a single answer. So just don't think about these unnecessary things. Men will not be moved to tears by something with a little sense of ritual. What can make people empathize may be the long legs seen on the roadside, the straight wooden stick picked up casually, or the meme picture made by some idiot. Considering old John's background, maybe it would be more popular to help him tie up a Japanese devil or a Nazi? Henry thought so. Please read, collect and recommend my new book. Thank you. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 22 Cooking. John, I'm back. There were no hugs or tears, no expressions of deep emotion. Simply put, the two had only known each other for a month or two, and their relationship wasn't that close. More seriously, the greeting between two grown men was so simple and unpretentious, unlikely to lead to anything out of the ordinary. So, standing behind the bar, polishing his glasses, old John asked simply, "Just got off the boat, just got back to port this morning. I took care of some business and came back." Old John knew the situation on the crab boats, and with a quick calculation, he knew Henry's situation. He casually said, "If you want to rest, come into the room. Don't lie around in the bar like a homeless person. I don't take people like that here." He offered Henry a glass of whiskey, completely disregarding the legal drinking age. "Got it," Henry said, chugging the whiskey, and then he ran to the room behind the bar. While he could continue working, to avoid being too shocking, he decided to go with the flow and rest. He'd been working non-stop for days, a level of overtime he'd never experienced before his time travel. Even a Kryptonian couldn't help but feel something was amiss. After all, the Bering Sea still had sunshine in winter. Henry was essentially recharging while working. For his physique, not only was the energy consumption minimal, but he actually received more energy than working at a bar. But energy wasn't the nutrient the body needed. While he could keep himself going when his energy was high, once he relaxed, it was like a power outage, and he fell unconscious. He didn't know how long he'd slept, but he was finally awakened by the urge to urinate. Since his body had recovered to a certain degree, Henry's bowel movements had returned to normal, instead of the previous pattern of only taking in and not producing. When he woke up, he ignored the suboptimal heating and the chilly temperature in the room. He rushed to the bathroom in a vest and shorts. When he emerged, he noticed the bar was already closed for the evening. Old John, with a resentful look, sat up from the sofa by the wall and glared at the man, who had just woken up from his urge to pee. "John, why are you sleeping here?" As soon as he asked, Henry realized he'd been asking a question he already knew the answer to. Sure enough, old John's venomous tongue arrived. "When you first got here, I could have dragged you away with a single finger. I damn well suspect I've been feeding you pig food all this time, lie on my bed, and I'd have a hard time kicking you off even if I wanted to. You idiot, you dare ask me why I don't have a bed? Even if you cleaned your ass, I'm not interested in a man like you, yet. Next time I'm really clean, I'll show you around and see if I'm really not interested." "Okay, alright," he replied indifferently. But the most important task now is to get food for himself. So Henry started to rummage through the refrigerator. He had bought some ingredients from the store when he came back, and now he just took them out to cook. Now that the old man is awake, Henry will certainly not just focus on making his own portion. He just asked casually, "Do you want something to eat?" "I'm starving." John, who was sitting at the bar, shook his head and said, "No, eating in the middle of the night is not good for the old man's digestion." Henry didn't comment and started to prepare the food he wanted to eat. He lived alone before he traveled through time, and in addition to eating out, he would occasionally make some food for himself. It was not for nutrition or to save money, but simply because he wanted to eat. If he saw a strange recipe somewhere, and couldn't find a good restaurant, he might as well make it himself. For example, he had seen a German family ethics movie, Braised Chicken and Red Wine. It would be better to say that he was moved by the deep love between father and daughter that came from nothing, rather than saying that he was greedy for the dish in the movie. Let's say that he went there because of the name of the movie at first. But he couldn't find any restaurant that served this dish. If he wanted to eat it, he might as well make it himself. For example, in order to have a taste of the dish that appeared in the anime, golden fried rice, he even practiced flipping the wok. Regardless of whether the golden fried rice made him satisfied or disappointed in the end, he was at least a beginner in the art of cooking. During the more than 1 month that he was taken in by old John, Henry also prepared food several times. Of course, his limited skills wouldn't instantly transform him into a master chef, the kind that could make even fried rice sparkle after arriving on the other side of the ocean. After all, the cuisine of his hometown relies on a variety of spices to enhance it. Even bland dishes like bear paws and shark fins could be given flavor. Spices were considered luxuries in Europe and America a century or 80 years ago. At most, they used salt and readily available herbs for seasoning. For a state whose economy relies heavily on fishing and oil, agricultural and livestock products must be imported from Canada or shipped thousands of miles from mainland China. Alaska certainly offered no room for Henry, a half-baked chef, to flourish. Fortunately, American food culture is inherently rich in oil, salt, and generous portions. As long as one avoids the food and meat controlled by major grain producers, one can still find high-quality ingredients from small agricultural products. Admittedly, there are always pitfalls with small agricultural products, but for Henry, with his exceptional nose, these are no major issues. After a period of practice, Henry has become adept at identifying spoiled or near-spoiled ingredients. Eliminating ingredients with overt chemical odors and excessively negative, off-putting flavors, Henry was able to select ingredients of inherently superior quality. For example, the large steak he was currently serving could be made quite delicious simply by searing it. Combined with his vision, sense of smell, and the mastery afforded by his super brain, every dish he prepared was a process of optimization, a constant search for the optimal solution. If those scientists knew he devoted his superhuman brain to culinary research, many would probably be suicidal with envy. But Henry didn't care. Everything he had was solely for his own enjoyment. The poem mantra, "Only those who endure the most difficult hardships can rise to prominence," is a foolish one. In the real world, it's like endure the most difficult hardships, and your boss will buy a Mercedes. When the steak was completely seared, a pot of macaroni was also cooked nearby. In Alaska, starch comes from either macaroni or potatoes. While other options exist, they're either expensive or taste terrible. So, Henry had adapted to the local culinary culture. After serving the food, old John didn't go to sleep. Instead, he opened a bottle of red wine and waited. It was made in California, delicious and affordable. He poured himself and Henry a glass of red wine. The old man looked at his own wall of glory and recalled his past. At the same time, he muttered to himself, "New book, please read, collect, and recommend it. Thank you." Chapter 23: A Visit from the Sheriff. While it's common for elderly people to reminisce about the past, it's unusual for old John to reminisce about his wartime experiences. He only occasionally brings them up when he's in a good mood. He doesn't expect a response when he talks about these things. Perhaps this has to do with him having lived alone for most of his life, accustomed to entertaining himself. He'll talk about the heroes he met during the war, how many fascists they killed, and who they saved. He'll also recount how he met his wife during that difficult time and how they married after the war. He'll talk about her kindness and every detail of their life together. At these times, Henry just needs to be a patient listener. He doesn't even need to respond with "and then," the kind of response a listener should expect. He just needs to shut up and listen. Of course, that night, Henry was busy eating. He'd finish his meal, then cook, and then eat again. Old John, under the influence of alcohol, kept talking. It was as if he were dreaming, and all the past events came flooding back to him. By the time the old man finally tucked himself in for sleep, it was past 7 in the morning. Even in winter Alaska at this time, it was still dark, and the house still relied on lamplight for lighting. After getting the man to bed, Henry cleaned the kitchen and began cleaning the bar. Old John would clean after closing each day, but dust was a constant accumulation. He dusted off these minor nuisances and then repaired any minor damage. Old John was used to waiting until things were practically unusable before tackling them. But Henry wasn't used to that. Limited repairs were a form of maintenance, extending the lifespan of items. Old John waited until absolutely necessary, in part because he lacked the physical strength of a younger man and couldn't handle everything thoroughly. Once the bar was ready for opening, he'd flip the sign outside to read open and officially welcome customers. But this was just a pretense. Anyone who dared to drink at the bar in broad daylight would be met with Old John's fiery taunts. Things like, "Only hooligans and good-for-nothings come here drinking during the day. Even scoundrels know his mother goes out to make money or party during the day. You're such a loser, you're out here drinking during the day, you're ashamed of your father. The people I sell alcohol to during the day either have their wives run away or are sleeping with someone else. As long as you're so worthy of sympathy, I'll allow you to get drunk here. Otherwise, get your fat ass out and get a decent job." What kind of idiot would think of getting drunk during the day? Oh, it's you. You can only do the kind of work a dog could do, so don't blame anyone if you get your job taken away. I hope you have enough money to keep drinking until you're in your grave. I don't let people buy on credit. In short, Old John had educated everyone in town to avoid a bar during the day. So, after tidying up, Henry contentedly turned on the classic movie channel on the TV and took his spot by the window, where the sun could shine, watching a movie while basking in the sun. So comfortable. Soon, the bar door opened. The winter chill poured into the room, the sudden drop in temperature making him shiver. Henry was just wondering who'd dare enter the bar in broad daylight, when he saw a middle-aged, dead-like figure, as burly as a bear but with a bulging belly. He was wearing a police uniform, and Henry recognized him as the town sheriff. All right. Old John could say some nonsense, but Henry would have to be prepared to get shot if he dared. Not to mention the sheriff himself. Greeting him, "Good morning, Sheriff," Henry approached the bar and asked, "What would you like?" "Water, Henry," the sheriff, after a brief stroll, approached. "Right up, Sheriff." The bar's water was lemonade, usually used for rinsing out mouths, free of charge. Henry poured a glass in a glass and brought it to the woman. "Henry, I heard you went out to sea. When did you come back?" "I don't know how long I slept, but I returned to port on the 16th, the same day. Today is the 18th, and you slept for more than a day. Luckily, it's only a little over a day." "We didn't waste much time," Henry said self-deprecatingly. "Where's Old John? He should have been up by this time. Why can't I see him? I woke him up in the early morning. He chatted with me for a while, and now he's catching up on some sleep. Do you want me to wake him?" "No need." The sheriff stood up, walked towards the room behind the bar, and said, "Do you mind if I take a look?" Henry waved his hand in a pleased gesture. Even if he hadn't done so, the sheriff would have cautiously pushed the door open and looked inside. As luck would have it, Old John just turned over and farted loudly towards the door. The sheriff quickly closed the door and cursed, "Fuck, that old man." Henry shrugged helplessly. He couldn't just rush in and stop the old man from talking nonsense. Back at the bar, the sheriff pointed to the Cadillac he could see outside the window and asked, "Is that yours?" "I bought it from old Tom. He let me drive it first, and you're still working on the paperwork." "Tom? Which Tom?" "The Tom from old Tom's Human Resources Agency and Consulting in that little town down south." "Ah, it's him. I was wondering why this car looked so familiar." The sheriff, not sure if he truly didn't know or was just playing dumb, added, "I remember you were on, whose boat?" "Old George's boat, the N21. The Pole introduced me there." "Oh, yes, old George's boat. Crabbing's tough, isn't it? I went to the Bering Sea in winter when I was young, and it left a lasting impression on me." Recounting the experience, Henry complained, "Yeah, it's been a lot of work. Before we went out to sea, I was wondering if I hadn't taken some time off to rest and stay alert for the day. I later realized it's impossible to get enough sleep on a boat. Everyone just wants to get it done quickly and get back to port, dangering or hard work. I think those are both too easy." Yeah, that's how I feel." The sheriff smiled and asked, "I heard you wanted to go to Hollywood?" "You know, when I was younger, I dreamed of seeing Hollywood's red sofas and having all the actresses at my disposal." Henry's eyes lit up, and he said, "Oh, did you succeed? That lousy place, even odd jobs are a struggle. Forget red sofas, I couldn't even sleep on one. So I came back." "Okay. I decided to take advantage of this crabbing season to go out more often. It seems like a wise choice." I'm not expecting to make it big in Hollywood, I'll just treat it as a sightseeing trip." "Well, then you'll have to work hard." The sheriff drank his water and stood up to leave. "Patrol time. If you need anything in town, you know my phone number." "Okay, Sheriff." Henry stood up to see him off. "New book. Please read, bookmark, and recommend it." "Thank you." Chapter 24. 7 days later. The 7 days agreed upon with Old George had arrived, and Henry was preparing to set off alone. This time, he didn't need a guide or introductions. Old John, like he was constantly groping around the bar, seemed to have endless things to do. He looked at the departing man and asked, "Is Old George sure you're going out to sea? Why don't you call first to avoid a wasted trip?" "No big deal. I need to get my documents from Tom anyway. Even if we're not out at sea, I'll check in to see what's going on." Henry didn't really have much to pack. Once on a crabbing boat, few people thought about showering or changing into clean clothes. After all, once you're on deck, you're soaked in seawater in less than 3 minutes. Wearing a raincoat or coat is primarily for protection from the wind and to prevent your body heat from being lost too quickly. Expecting to stay dry is sheer wishful thinking. So, no change of clothes was necessary for the boat. The necessary gear was all on board. So, Henry's so-called preparations simply meant getting on board, nothing else mattered. But Henry still took out the bank's money bag from the old backpack Tom had given him, took out a few small bills from it, and put the whole bag on the bar. "John, this is my payment from last time. Find a place to keep it for me. If you need it, take it yourself," the old man said with a look of disgust. "Fuck, why didn't you put the money in the bank instead of carrying it around? When you found me, I was naked. Do you think I have a bank account or the documents to open one? I'm only going to pick it up today." "Fuck, won't it be deposited into that damn account today? I've already withdrawn cash, and the handling fee was deducted. I'm so stupid that I have to hand the money to those vampires. I'll be deducted again when I try to withdraw it later. Do I look so stupid? Anyway, I don't think you're that smart, you fool who can't tell the difference between scotch and bourbon. How can I know it tastes like shit when I'm eating shit for the first time? You're making things difficult for me, old man. Anyway, I don't want to touch your money. It smells like fish. If it smells, it's because king crab tastes good. I'm asking you, but do I need to take it on the boat? That's even more troublesome. Or leaving it in the car? That's like giving it away to thieves. You know how chaotic that town down south is, as a port town with boats out during crabbing season, although not as large as the larger fishing ports, it always attracts people looking to make money. And these people's ways of making money aren't limited to boarding the crab boats. Some are sailors, some run scams, and of course, there are plenty of petty thieves and occasional robbers. So Henry hadn't considered leaving the money in the car, it would have been a real nuisance. Realizing Henry was being truthful, old John said impatiently, "Fuck, you troublesome guy. Leave it next to the cash register. I'll put it in the safe later, thanks." Henry grabbed his empty old backpack and headed out. In late October in Alaska, the outdoor temperatures were cold enough to freeze anyone's balls to pulp, even in a coat and cotton pants. Henry, despite his superhuman physique, was impervious to cold and heat, but he could still tell the difference between hot and cold. He could function shirtless in this weather, but there was no need to act so unnatural in front of others. So, he followed the crowd and wore what most people would wear in such weather. When it was his turn to drive, he paid no attention to speed limits or safe driving. He focused his heightened attention on the road ahead, practically flooring the accelerator even though he knew there were no cars ahead for a long distance. The '65 Cadillac DeVille he'd bought from Tom was 25 years old, but the owner had maintained it meticulously and had never been in a major accident. So, it was in excellent condition. On this 2-lane highway, he could easily reach over 100 kilometers per hour. Despite the icy conditions, the tires still had plenty of grip. At least, aided by Henry's super senses, the Cadillac glided smoothly down the highway. In a little over 2 hours, even faster than last time, they arrived at a southern town during crabbing season. Henry first headed to the dock to meet up with old George. If sailing was possible, he'd call Tom and tell him to pick up his documents upon returning to port. If not, he'd go directly to old Tom. In the rest area outside the dock management office, Henry immediately spotted old George and the other crew members, including the mutant he'd rescued last time. However, a closer look revealed that one of the veteran crew members from the previous trip was missing. Instead, the mutant had brought a fellow mutant. This massive figure was likely over 2 meters tall and weighed nearly 200 kilograms, a true giant. He was a mutant because his arms were disproportionately large. Ever seen arms thicker than legs? This guy looked just like that. Because of his unusual arm proportions, even though his clothes were sized accordingly, he always wore them sleeveless. Even in the cold Alaskan weather, he still wore his bare arms. Henry was the last to arrive, but he still had about 10 minutes before the scheduled time, so he wasn't considered late. Seeing everyone else arrive, George didn't insist on waiting. Instead, he stood up and said, "Two things to tell you all. First, I've been in touch with the An-21 by radio. Their crabbing progress is a little slow, and they're not scheduled to arrive in port for 2 days, so we'll meet here at the same time in 2 days. Once the An-21 arrives and unloads, we'll take over the repairs and restocking." "No problem, right?" Everyone responded in twos and threes. "Sure, boss, sure." The second thing is, one of the old guys has gone to captain another ship, so we've found a little green guy. This big guy is incredibly strong. I've seen him lift crab pots by himself. He's a little slow, though, so please take good care of him. "Oh, welcome, welcome, you're so strong, that's great. Please bear with the boat's affairs." Little Green had no rights on the crab boat, not even the right to be called by name. So no one asked the big guy's name. As for being popular just because he was strong, no one cared about his mutant identity. That was perfectly normal. Because the most dangerous thing about working on a crab boat is the swinging of the suspended crab pots. If someone got hit, it wouldn't be surprising to lose half their life. Like Henry's personal experience last time, someone was dragged into the sea, which is a common type of accident. Having someone with enough strength can really prevent many accidents. In fact, if it really came down to strength, Henry was confident that he wouldn't lose to a mutant. But his appearance was still within the normal range. So there was really no need to expose it unnecessarily. So he just welcomed a new little green guy like everyone else. Please read, collect, and recommend my new book. Thank you. Chapter 25: A Strange Worldview. George said a few words, ending the meeting for the day. Everyone naturally dispersed, going about their own business. The mutant with Jill's, whom Henry had saved last time, hooked his arm around his savior's neck after finishing. He said, "You're free today, wanna come to the strip club with us?" Someone's shaking their butt on stage this early in the morning? Aren't these people too dedicated? During crab season, there are always girls performing at the club. There's a lot of people, so even if you want to find a solo dancer, that's no problem, said the young mutant, who knew the place well. "Forget it, I only have some change with me today. If I really can't even afford a drink at the club, I don't want to experience being thrown out by the bodyguards." "Well, that's not a problem. You saved my life, and I was thinking of buying you a drink anyway. You can go to the club, I'll treat you. I'm also going to take my brother to see some women today." Henry was almost tempted by the offer. But he was a hard-working man at heart. They say starting a business is tough, and now, just as he was preparing to save his first pot of gold, it wasn't time to enjoy it yet. He was a penniless alien with nothing. Unless he planned to rob a bank, if he wanted to survive, he had to prepare the funds first. Spending money on strippers felt like throwing money away. Besides, even though he was destined to be a hard-working man, he did have some business sense. As the saying goes, where there are many tourists, there are inevitably rip-offs. This was peak sailor season, so how could this kind of business not be a scam? Henry didn't refuse too decisively. Instead, he put on a look of regret, a look of struggle followed by a resigned resignation. "It's not that I don't want to go, but I have other things to do. You know, I have some identity issues to sort out." The young mutant understood his insinuation. They say the United States is a country of immigrants, and even today, there's a constant influx of people, both legal and illegal. Regardless of the type of person, they'll find a way to deal with this problem. So the young mutant could only say regretfully, "Well, your matter is indeed important. Would you like me to introduce you to someone who can handle this?" Henry said, "I found some avenues. I'll give them a try first. If that doesn't work, I'll come back and ask you for help." "I'll need your help then." "Okay, let me know if you need anything," the young mutant said casually. While their relationship wasn't one of the four great bonds of life, their experience working together on the crab boat was no less than sharing a gun. As long as it was something convenient, no one would refuse. Of course, With the American culture of private affairs, they wouldn't be like the aunts and uncles back home, who would meddle in other people's affairs and refuse to let them interfere. So, after saying hello to old George, Henry drove to Tom's office. The town wasn't big, so the driving time wasn't as much as the time spent finding a car and parking. So Henry arrived at his destination in no time. But judging by the parking in front of the door, they were quite busy today. With this thought, Henry's super senses revealed that old Tom's office had indeed had a few more people. Judging from their peaceful seating, it was likely just business, not a major nuisance. Furthermore, the usually calm and composed woman sitting in the common office area near the entrance maintained their usual demeanor. Henry pushed open the door and entered, greeting, "Hello, is old Tom here?" he was asking knowingly, but no one else was aware. The woman gestured to the sofa seating area nearby and said, "Tom has company, wait here, okay?" As he passed the woman's desk, he spotted several more gold coins casually placed on the table. These coins were minted with high quality, clearly modern craftsmanship, and unlikely to be antiques. However, modern commemorative gold coins are typically sealed in plastic when sold. Besides preventing deformation and grease, they're also primarily designed to protect against scratches. This suggests they're primarily for commemorative purposes, not for circulation as currency. However, the coins on the table were poorly protected, showing obvious signs of use, much like small change. This was quite unusual. Furthermore, the designs on the coins showed no discernible nationality, suggesting a strong likelihood of private minting. So, Alaska, which had its gold rush, also had a habit of using gold coins as currency? Henry, baffled, lingered on the coins for a moment. The woman rolled her eyes, then opened the same drawer again and shoved the coins inside. She wasn't worried about the gold losing weight and value from scratches. So was it fake gold? Gold-plated? While the question remained unanswered, the woman's actions were almost clear. Henry withdrew his gaze and picked up a magazine from the nearby newspaper rack. At old John's bar, he was busy watching the classic movie channel on TV. While his bar had a newspaper subscription, it was only a local paper with little content. So Henry didn't make a habit of reading it. Tom, however, had a selection of national magazines, covering business and fashion. While many were old, they were enough for Henry. He picked up a copy of Time, the most representative magazine. The cover featured a handsome old man in a smart suit, a handlebar mustache, and white hair. Although Henry was attracted to the older white man on the cover, it had nothing to do with his sexual orientation. The cover of the magazine boasted a bold headline, "The most successful scientist and the smartest businessman." Inside, the cover revealed the man on the cover was Howard Stark, chairman of Stark Industries. This conglomerate, encompassing businesses across consumer goods, military, and aerospace, was founded from scratch by a mechanical prodigy who showed glimpses of talent at a young age. With the help of his business partner, Obadiah Stane, it grew into the influential behemoth it is today. In addition to Howard Stark's patents, the article also recounted Stark Industries' involvement in major historical events, from government projects during World Wars I and II, the birth of Captain America, the Apollo program of the 1960s, and even the moon landings. The article was filled with praise and success stories, replete with a flavor of traditional Chinese chicken soup. However, looking at this person's photo, Henry had a deeper understanding of his real arrival in the Marvel Universe. It's just that this place doesn't look like a pure movie universe. Because mutants can be seen everywhere. And it's common for American comics to follow the books and settings. In this case, the advantage of foreknowledge is actually not that big. Coupled with the fact that he is a Kryptonian who went to the wrong studio, Henry has become more determined to follow the principle of not being idle if he can. Let others do the things like Long Ocean. They are fighting against everything, even the celestial gods and the living tribunal, and even the next studio. Aren't those people tired? Why doesn't anyone go home after fighting? I'm looking forward to reading, collecting, and recommending my new book. Thank you. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.